Chapter 1649. Hearing that despicable voice, the young man immediately recalled the divine wine he had received as a gift after being hunted down by the devil lord. Later on, it was also because of this despicable person that he had encountered many troubles. He had even almost died in the Thousand Thunder realm. Later on, when he returned to the Upper Stream realm, he had been haunting him, causing the young man to have no choice but to leave the drifting cloud realm again and come to the god realm. He had encountered many things. Although there weren't many fragments of memories, the young man's lips curled into a satisfied smile as he recalled all the scenes that had happened. This was because the owner of this voice was also the person he felt indebted to. He did not expect this person to appear at this juncture. If this person could come out of closed-door cultivation at this juncture, it meant that he had achieved something. In fact, he had already stepped into that realm. Thinking of this, the young man's smile grew even wider. More than that, he felt relieved. He had thought that he would hinder his friend's bright future, but now it seemed that this was no longer the case. On the contrary, it was this friend of his who had forced him into a hopeless situation and then fought his way out of it, obtaining even greater achievements. The door was pushed open, and a man in long robes who looked mighty and extraordinary walked in. However, the cynical look on the man's face was a little different from his tall and lofty image. As expected, this was the friend that the young man had wanted to see the most after arriving in the god realm, Shen Wuxuang. Seeing his old friend whom he had not seen for years, Xiaoyang smiled from the bottom of his heart. He felt that this might be the best outcome. He could enter the tomb of the god of sin through the god realm tournament, and this righteous friend of his could rely on his own talent to obtain a spot. Upon closer inspection, Shen Wuxuang's aura was somewhat sharp and overbearing. Although they were still some distance apart, they could clearly feel the sacred and majestic aura. This was a necessary stage after stepping into rank 9. It was difficult to familiarize and suppress the power of this level, causing the aura to leak out and form a threatening aura. Although there was no need to ask, he knew very well that Shen Wuxuang had now stepped into King Wu rank 9. It could be said that in the god realm he was the second person in his generation to enter the 9th stage. Why are you looking at me so infatuatedly? Could it be that you've fallen in love with me? Unrivaled God teased, grinning cheekily. Unrivaled God was still the same unrivaled God. Although he had made a breakthrough in his realm and became one of the top people in the god realm, his mentality had not changed at all. He still treated his friends the same way as before. There was no change in the way he treated them. When Xiaoyang heard this, he was so angry that he threw a cattail hassock at him. A leopard cannot change its spots. This guy's cheap mouth was probably beyond redemption. The cattail hassock looked light as a feather. Unrivaled God reached out casually and grabbed it in his hand. It did not look like he had expended any effort at all. The long-robed man didn't stand on ceremony either. He didn't care whether there was a door or not behind him. He directly sat down on the ground, not treating himself as an outsider at all. Of course, he wasn't an outsider to begin with. Instead, he was the owner of this courtyard. I think you're still asking for a beating, Xiaoyang sighed helplessly and said. His initial anticipation was now gone. Instead, he was annoyed. What the eye didn't see, the heart didn't grieve over. Unrivaled God, on the other hand, looked like a scoundrel. He said, "Come at me if you can beat me." The current unrivaled God looked fearless. He looked as if he knew that Lin Huang wouldn't be able to beat him even if he gave Lin Huang the chance. You're already one of the top existences in the god realm. Why are you still so undignified? Xiaoyang felt helpless. He respected and hated a friend like unrivaled God at the same time. Unrivaled God looked indifferent. He said, "If I have to put on airs even in front of my friends, then I'm really fake." It wasn't that unrivaled God didn't know how to put on airs. After all, he was born into the royal family. He was born with that kind of talent. It was just that as time passed, his temperament changed drastically. But to be honest, you didn't disappoint me. Now that I think about it, Since God Days was defeated by you, that guy must be so upset that his Taoist heart is about to collapse, Unrivaled God said and laughed out loud. He looked like he was taking pleasure in Lin Huang's misfortune. Xiao Yong felt helpless when he saw Unrivaled God's reaction. It seemed that the conflict in the royal family was quite serious. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to describe it as a storm. To think that there would be such a barrier between blood relatives. This was truly rare. Unrivaled God was very pleased when he saw Xiao Yang win first place. His painstaking efforts had paid off in the end. Unrivaled God had never thought about what kind of return he would receive in the future after investing so much in Lin Huang. However, he felt that the young man in front of him was a very good friend. Don't do that next time. Otherwise, I think I'll never be able to repay such a favor in this lifetime. If there really is a next time, let's not be friends anymore, Xiao Yang muttered helplessly after a long while. As far as he was concerned, this favor was far too great, and he was unable to accept it. Even though Unrivaled God had great confidence that he could set foot on King Wu rank 9, he would lose a great opportunity if there was even the slightest mistake. Sometimes, just the order of time was enough to make a genius go unnoticed. Unrivaled God waved his hand nonchalantly and said, "It's fine if we don't want to be friends. I think you'll be famous now that you've won first place. Maybe you'll really win Mingzhu's heart in a few more days. Then we'll be family and brothers." Xiao Yang held his forehead when he heard that. It was rare for him to feel so bad. He had only spoken a few sentences, and he was already acting frivolously. However, a friend like this was very reassuring, and there was no need to be so wary. Sometimes this sloppy behavior was also an expression of trust. If they weren't real friends, who would show themselves so carelessly? We haven't seen each other for a long time. How can we be happy if we don't drink and catch up? Unrivaled God said with a smile. At the same time, he grabbed at the void, and an exquisite gourd appeared in his hand. Chapter 1650. In the divine tomb, there was not the slightest bit of life to speak of. Everything was just dead silence. The feeling of desolation and vicissitudes was very strong. The gloomy atmosphere could be said to be very strong, causing people to involuntarily have a very uncomfortable feeling in their hearts. There was even a feeling of repulsion towards this place. This place was originally a cemetery. Naturally, it was lifeless and devoid of life. Even the sky was gloomy. Even if there were clouds, they were also gloomy without the slightest bit of color. The feeling of oppression was also very strong. Entering this place, it was very easy for people to feel uneasy. It was as if no matter what they looked at, it would cause them to feel angry. The reason for this could be said to be simple and clear. It was caused by the dead silence of this place. The gloomy atmosphere also became stronger because there was not the slightest bit of life in this place. Over time, it became like this. Even though this place was a secret realm, in the end, it was still a cemetery. Even if it was a divine tomb, it was still the burial place of the gods. It was just a bigger and more spacious cemetery. Moreover, the ones buried here might not necessarily be the real gods. The divine tomb was just a name that was brought about by the divine realm. However, one thing was certain. In the ancient times, if one did not have great achievements and outstanding contributions to the divine realm, one would not be able to be buried in this cemetery. As for the origin of this divine tomb, there were naturally different opinions. There were many theories. Some people felt that this place used to be an ancient battlefield in the past. In the face of extremely vicious foreign enemies, the martyrs of the divine realm fought bravely in this place. In the end, they fell in this place and became a burial place. Then, they used a large sum of money to seal the foreign race. There were also rumors that this place was obtained by the ancestors because of great achievements and made this secret realm as their burial place. However, no matter which theory it was, there were traces that could be followed. There were even some that were somewhat convincing. As for which theory was ultimately correct, it was still unknown. Perhaps both were possible. On a small hill, a man in white stood there. There was a somewhat anxious look on his face. It was obvious that he was not used to the atmosphere of this place. That was why he was like this. As the man in white stood there, his feelings of disgust gradually dissipated. He had also just arrived here. In his heart, there were mixed feelings. Perhaps the situation here was somewhat different from what he had originally imagined. That was why his expression was so awkward. I didn't expect the divine tomb to be so grand. As the man in white spoke, the smile at the corner of his mouth showed a rather helpless look. The man in white was of course Xiaoyang. As he did not know what was going on in the divine tomb, he had changed into magic clothes before he entered, in case he needed. Suddenly, Xiaoyang seemed to have thought of something. He shook his head and laughed bitterly. The tomb of the god of sin had been bragged by a sloppy guy about how grand it was. He said that this place had beautiful mountains and limpid waters, was full of brilliant lights, and was full of unspeakable benefits. Xiaoyang had also been drinking and catching up with that fellow when they were at the king's residence. At that time, the sloppy, unrivaled god had also praised the various benefits of this place without holding back. After reminiscing about the past, they got drunk. When they got drunk, they arrived at the tomb of the god of sin and hurried over. It was true that drinking would spoil things. If the divine god had not come in time to wake the two of them up, they might have missed the opportunity to enter the divine tomb. Of course, since the boy was not interested in these things, the adults in his family would not do that. Therefore, they were constantly watching their movements. That was why they did not end up like this. In the divine tomb, there were no rules to speak of. This was because this place was completely isolated from the divine realm. Even if the God Emperor had extraordinary divine powers, he could only use the secret method passed down by his ancestors to open the passage. It was impossible for him to pay attention to the changes in the divine realm. Moreover, in the face of an opportunity, not everyone could be determined. Moreover, this opportunity did not belong to just one person. Sometimes, opportunities also needed to be fought for. As for what kind of changes would occur during the fight, it was unknown. Even if they fought until their heads were broken and blood flowed, the sky turned dark and the earth turned dark. Even if they fought to the death, it would still be difficult to stop it. It seemed that the divine abode also acquiesced to such behavior. Or perhaps it was because the divine abode was too far away and they had no other choice. Therefore, there were great opportunities in the divine tomb, but at the same time there were also great risks. That was because the fight for the opportunity would be even more intense at that time. Moreover, after leaving the divine tomb, no one would know what you did. Even if you did, no one would know. It was also because of such a confined space that many people could do whatever they wanted without any scruples. Therefore, the battles would become even more tragic. As for what kind of opportunity each person would obtain, it completely depended on their luck. Moreover, after entering the divine tomb, each person would appear in a different place. It would depend on who was favored by the ancestors more or who had better luck. They would be able to find their own opportunity earlier and soar to the sky in one go. Xiaoyang did not know where he was now. He only knew that he was in the divine tomb. As for the environment and the overall situation, he naturally had no idea. The divine emperor suggested that one stay in the divine tomb for 3 years. Of course, if one encountered a great opportunity, one could extend the time. However, one must not wait until one was rescued and eventually become a tomb keeper or even be assimilated by the aura inside. If that happened, it would be difficult, even if one wanted to leave. As for the tomb keeper, it was also very mysterious and there was not much explanation. However, Xiaoyang felt that he had been deceived by unrivaled God. He had said that it was a blessed place, but now it was a desolate place. How could he feel good about it? Xiaoyang even felt a little repulsed by this place. Of course, the reason for this was very simple. It was because there was a dead aura here. There was no spiritual energy at all. It was not suitable for cultivation at all. Moreover, there was not even the slightest aura of a living person here, let alone spiritual energy. The dead aura would even invade one's physical body and consciousness. It was simply a dangerous place with barren hills and turbulent rivers. Perhaps the 3 years that the divine emperor had mentioned was the limit that most cultivators could endure. Any longer, and they would probably exhaust themselves. Chapter 16:51. It was meaningless for a cultivator to stay in a place without the slightest spiritual chi for a long time, and it might even be a burden to them. What's more, there was a very strong death chi in the tomb of the god of sin. One had to use one's own cultivation to resist it. However, under the erosion of the death chi over the years, it would be impossible to resist it completely and might even be corroded. It could be said that this place was not a beautiful paradise. Perhaps for some people with great luck, it was a wonderful place. For those who didn't have good luck, it was probably hell. However, it was not an exaggeration to call this place hell. After all, no matter how one looked at it, this place was lifeless, almost no different from the road to the underworld described in books. If a space was closed for too long, it would easily become a dead place without sufficient spiritual chi to support it. As the name implied, the tomb of the god of sin was naturally very clear about what was going on. However, the only thing that surprised Xiaoyang was the intensity of the death aura here, which was really a little shocking. If this situation continued, the tomb of the god of sin would eventually become a completely dead place one day. Even if a rank 8 cultivator like King Wu came in, he would be like a clay bodhisattva crossing a river, unable to protect himself. Of course, this was not something that Xiaoyang could worry about. After all, as long as he could get an opportunity here this time, it would be enough. As for how to get out of the tomb of the god of sin, it was very simple. Everyone had a token in their hand, and as long as they crushed it, they could get out. If it wasn't for the fact that he had no other choice, he wouldn't have done it so easily. After all, the temptation of the great opportunity in the tomb of the god of sin was really too great. Such a strong death aura. I wonder if it has given birth to some dark things. Xiaoyang muttered in a low voice, looking helpless. Some information could be gleaned from this oppressive atmosphere. It was very common for a place with death aura to give birth to dark things, and it was even common. Moreover, this tomb of the god of sin had appeared for tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years, or even longer. Therefore, under such circumstances, it was normal for some changes to occur. Of course, Xiaoyang was not too concerned about these dead things or the changes in the divine tomb. After all, they could be carefully guarded against. However, before entering the divine tomb, Xiaoyang obtained a piece of information from Bai Jian, which was related to the Thousand Thunder Realm. Lei Dingtian, the number 1 genius of the Thousand Thunder Palace in the Thousand Thunder Realm, was already aware of what had happened to his sect. Due to the fact that fighting was not allowed in the God Realm, the other party had always been patient and had not had the chance to make a move. However, after entering the tomb of the god of sin, many things would change. Without the restrictions of rules, Lei Dingtian would not have to be afraid of anything. It was also a great opportunity for revenge. How could he miss it? Therefore, if you meet Lei Dingtian, you must take a detour. Even if you crush the token to get out of the tomb of the god of sin, it will be fine. After all, even if you can find an opportunity, you must use your own life to use it. Only then will it be considered yours. As the number 1 genius of the Thousand Thunder Realm, Lei Dingtian could only be better than Lei Dingyin in terms of strength and aptitude. Moreover, he had obtained the qualification to enter the divine tomb without participating in the God Realm tournament. This also showed that he was King Wu's 9th stage existence. However, as to how far he had come, no one knew. However, when they met Lei Dingtian, he did not leak any aura. This was enough to show that he had been in the 9th stage for a long time. Therefore, no matter how one looked at it, Lei Dingtian's strength was unfathomable. Even Bai Jian had to avoid him and did not dare to provoke him easily, let alone Xiaoyang, who was in the 8th stage. As the saying goes, when enemies meet, their eyes blaze with hatred. Therefore, they had to be on guard against this person. Even if Lei Dingtian did not show any malice, Who could be sure that he was not seeking revenge? Thinking of this, Xiaoyang shook his head helplessly. Although he still had the explosive elixir, it was still unknown whether he would be able to fight Lei Dingtian head-on when the time came. Although the explosive elixir could forcibly raise one's level, its effect was indeed very powerful in the beginning. However, as one's level increased and one's strength continued to increase, the medicinal effect of the elixir would not be as overbearing as before. This was what unrivaled God had told Xiaoyang. He did not want his friend's blind confidence to lead to unforeseen events. After all, there was a difference between the level raised by elixir and the actual level raised by the elixir. On this point, unrivaled God had the absolute right to speak. Moreover, the difference between the 9th stage and the 8th stage was huge. Otherwise, how could there be countless 8th stage cultivators in the God realm who could only look at the ocean and sigh? Moreover, there were a few small realms within the 9 ranks. The difference between each small level was like the difference of one stage. Even if it was not that terrifying, it was almost there. Immediately, Xiaoyang shook his head and sorted out his thoughts. He stopped thinking about these questions and moved forward. Regarding his enemies in this place, he indeed needed to carefully analyze them. However, the tomb of the god of sin was huge and incomparably vast. Whether or not they would meet was still a big question. As long as he was prepared, that would be enough. Moreover, what was more important here was how to obtain opportunities. However, after the tomb of the god of the gods had been explored countless times, it was still a big question as to how many opportunities were left. If he did not look for them, there would definitely not be any opportunities. Xiaoyang moved forward. He did not choose to fly. The reason was simple. The suppression of the death aura was too strong. Moreover, if he walked in the void, he might miss out on a lot of things. The opportunities in the tomb of the god of sin were probably very different from those in the grotto heavens. Sometimes, some things needed to be carefully experienced and observed to be discovered. Moreover, there was still a lot of time. There was no need to rush. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Xiaoyang's mind. If he could adapt to the death aura and prevent it from invading his body, would he be able to stay in the tomb of the god of sin forever? Chapter 1652. A person's life depended on their vitality, which was also known as vitality. The more profound a person's cultivation was, the stronger their vitality would be. This was also the reason why a cultivator's lifespan was longer than that of an ordinary person. It could even be said that a person's lifespan was closely related to their cultivation. The longer one cultivated, the higher one's realm would be. With vitality, one would naturally be able to live a long life. There was even a portion of people who cultivated for the sake of longevity. However, there was a limit to one's strength. Who could truly not decay and live forever? Even in Xiaoyang's previous life, he had seen many old fellows who lived for tens of thousands of years, or even longer. However, he had never seen a person who could live from the beginning of the world to the present. Perhaps there was such a powerful person, but he had never seen it and did not know about it. After a person died and completely turned into a ghost, they would be lifeless. Or because of some other opportunities, they could cultivate in another way. It was like the coexistence of yin and yang. However, most of the time, yang was more important and yin was less important. It could be said that all cultivators had a breath of noble spirit. Even if they died, they would rely on this breath of noble spirit to be reborn or reincarnate. They would not exist as a malicious spirit or even a malicious spirit that would absorb death chi. In other words, death chi and yin chi were originally two different kinds of auras. Things created by death chi were more like a different kind of existence. Of course, it could not be said to be something completely evil. After all, there was no pure classification of good and evil in the world. There were only thoughts in one's heart. An arbitrary statement was wrong to begin with. As long as something had spiritual intelligence, it was difficult to judge whether it was good or evil. Of course, things like the black fire, which was born for destruction, were another matter. It was just that if one wanted to turn the death chi into spiritual power, one would need to take the method seriously. Even though Xiaoyang had seen a lot in his previous life and had become very knowledgeable because of alchemy, after thinking carefully, he really did not have any method to refine the death chi into spiritual power and use it to nourish the body. Even if he could turn the poison into divine medicine, it would be difficult for him to refine the death energy into spiritual energy or human energy. Immediately after, Xiaoyang even used the idea that extreme misfortune would bring joy, or that there would be no construction without destruction, and so on, but he still didn't succeed. On the contrary, his attempt had caused him to be corroded by some of the death aura, causing his expression to turn somewhat ugly. After trying many times, Xiaoyang could only shake his head and give up. This death chi was worthy of being called the number one enemy of cultivators. It was not a lie that it would only harm them and not benefit them. If the death chi could be used to refine pills, it would be useful. The man in white frowned, took out a gourd, and began to collect the death chi. It wasn't an easy task to find pure death energy in the outside world. This death chi wasn't completely useless. It could be used to refine some life-saving pills. As for whether or not he would use it in the future, that was another matter. Xiaoyang continued to move forward. The aura here indeed made him very uncomfortable. He even had a feeling that he was facing a great enemy. However, Xiaoyang had always been a very patient person. He constantly used his spiritual power to adapt to the changes in this place. This place was worthy of being a place of death. In this world, it could be said to be so quiet that it was creepy. There was not the slightest sound. Even if there was, it was the rustling of clothes and footsteps of the man in white when he walked. It was not without reason that this place was called lifeless. At a glance, one could see that it was the size of a hillside that was constantly undulating. However, it was all bare. There was no greenery at all. The so-called forest vegetation was nowhere to be seen. The yellow soil was endless, the sky was gray, and there were occasional gusts of cold wind. Even on this land, there was not the slightest living creature. Even small insects and the like did not exist. This was a place of death. Not a single blade of grass grew. Instead of nourishing, everything was devoured. The cold wind here was also very strong. Xiaoyang was a rank 8 Kingwu. In addition, he was very strong because he deliberately cultivated his physique. Even so, he felt a little cold and subconsciously tightened his clothes. From a high vantage point, one could see a white-clothed man moving forward in the gloomy world. He was exceptionally conspicuous, like a lone boat in the middle of a vast ocean. The cemetery, which had been quiet for 2 years, began to become a little more lively because many powerful cultivators had entered. It also added some people for no reason. Even though these cultivators were powerful and could do whatever they wanted in the 3,000 small worlds if they worked together, the vitality they displayed was like a drop in the ocean. It wouldn't even be an exaggeration to say that it wasn't enough to reach the apex. The powerful vitality of nearly 100 people was like a candle flame in the wind. It was hard to say when it would be extinguished and become a part of the land. Moreover, life force and death energy were incompatible with each other. They were like fire and water, and they would crush each other and completely crush each other. The death aura was like the sea, and vitality was like a lonely boat. If the wind and waves rose, how could the lonely boat protect itself from being swallowed up? This was the fundamental reason why they had to leave the tomb of the god of sin after 3 years. If they could not extricate themselves, once they were swallowed up by the death aura, they would only end up as a soulless walking corpse, a puppet of the death aura. Half a month had passed. The man in white also walked and stopped, carefully inspecting every place he went, for fear that he would miss something and cause him to lose the great opportunity. However, in this half a month, although he also came across a cemetery, when he went in to check, it was empty. Obviously, it had been searched by the cultivators who came to the tomb of the god of sin before. Even the inside was empty, leaving only a coffin sitting there alone. When he saw this scene, The young man could not help but laugh bitterly. Many people were simply too crazy when it came to opportunities. Fortunately, they still had some conscience and did not take the coffin. Otherwise, the owner of the tomb would have died without a burial place. Although there were many opportunities in the tomb of the god of sin, after countless explorations, there were not many left. While Xiaoyang was mocking himself, he saw a tablet. It was a very strange tablet that could not be considered tablet. Chapter 1653. The tablet looked very strange indeed. If one did not pay attention, one would not treat it as a tablet. The reason why it was strange was that the tablet felt like a sword that soared into the sky. However, there was no blade, and the tip of the sword was broken. If it were not for the words engraved on it, many people would think that it was a stone sword with a broken blade. The world was so big that it could be said to be grotesque and variegated. All kinds of things and people existed. Moreover, the first impression that the tablet gave was that it was a sword. Using a sword as a steel was indeed a rather rare thing. After all, there was a conflict between a stone tablet and a sword. Stone tablets had always been used to record things or to commemorate a martyr. On the other hand, a sword was incomparably sharp. Although it was the symbol of a gentleman, it could not avoid the name of killing intent. Regardless of whether it was to commemorate or record, it was very inappropriate to use the form of a weapon to present it. Of course, it was not that a sword tablet had never appeared before, but it was done by enemies. However, most people would push it down after encountering such a thing. Xiaoyang continued to move forward. He was also very curious. What kind of things were recorded on this tablet? Or what kind of grudges were there for such a situation to occur? He had to admit that it was very curious. After walking closer and carefully observing the stone tablet, it also made people feel that it was a sword that broke out from the ground. After the stone tablet experienced the continuous attack of the deathly aura, it seemed to have decayed a lot. In addition, there were some cracks on it due to the blow of the chilly wind. Although it looked like thin threads, it still gave people a feeling that it was about to collapse. The feeling that the stone tablet gave people was not very good. There was even a feeling of oppression. The sharp aura seemed to be particularly piercing in this gloomy world. The words on the stone tablet looked very beautiful, as if they were drawn with silver hooks and iron. Every stroke gave people a feeling that it was just right. Although there were cracks on the stone tablet and even on the text, it didn't affect its beauty. The text wasn't completely destroyed and it was still legible. However, Xiaoyang shook his head and sighed helplessly. The reason was very simple. It was because the inscriptions were written in an unknown ancient language. It could be said that he didn't recognize it at all. Even though Xiaoyang was quite knowledgeable and knew many languages of the world, he did not know when the words in front of him had been left behind from ancient times. Therefore, no one knew what was recorded in it. He did think of a possibility, but he only knew a few bits and pieces. But when put together, it was like a mess. There was no pattern at all. It was as if he randomly found some irrelevant words and gathered them together to form an article that didn't look like anything. For a moment, Xiaoyang felt a little helpless. He originally thought that he would be able to learn something from this inscription and learn about the situation in the tomb of the god of sin. Now it seemed that it was indeed not an easy task to find some clues from the words. It also made people feel helpless. However, the inscriptions gave people a feeling that even if they didn't recognize the handwriting, they could still read it. As for what one could get from these inscriptions, it would depend on one's fate. This feeling also made Xiaoyang feel a little strange, but he wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he sat on the ground and looked at the strange stone tablet and inscriptions in front of him. It wasn't a strange thing to have an aura. Since ancient times, there were many things that were passed down through ideas. On the contrary, if they were passed down through words, the later generations would misinterpret the meaning because of excessive interpretation. Some techniques were just that strange. Even if you made a slight mistake in your interpretation, the final result would be a huge mistake. Many techniques were even more illogical. One could only learn the divine intent within. There was no specific pattern or form to them at all. Such methods had always been relatively simple and difficult to cultivate. However, once one comprehended the true meaning, it would be like riding the wind. One could travel 1,000 miles in a day and even go straight to the sky and reach the top of the 9 heavens. Xiao Yang was very clear about this, so he wanted to try to see if he could see some clues from it. With the focus of his divine sense, Xiao Yang found that the words on the stone tablet in front of him began to change. Those words weren't necessarily words, because those lifeless strokes seemed to have come alive like moves and styles. He didn't expect that this strange stone tablet, which looked very illogical, actually had a cultivation method in it. Moreover, it was a sword technique. In an instant, there seemed to be countless swords in front of Xiao Yang's eyes. They were constantly waving as if they were displaying the profound meaning of it. That sword move was extremely wild and unrestrained. There were also quite a few exquisite areas. There were many areas where it was a stroke of genius. It was exceptionally brilliant. The man in white sitting on the ground was also intoxicated and very comfortable. At the same time, there seemed to be a small person in his mind that was constantly waving the sword. There seemed to be a very subtle reaction between the two. The inscriptions on the stone tablet and the man were constantly intertwining with each other. There was no time in the mountains. It was the same in the tomb of the god of sin, because in the tomb of the god of sin, it had always been dark. There was no day to speak of, so it was easy to forget about time. After an unknown period of time, the words seemed to have come alive. They turned into small people holding sharp swords and left the stone tablet. They rushed towards the intoxicated man. Suddenly, Xiao Yang's body trembled. Many inexplicable sword intents also appeared continuously. Inexplicable wounds appeared on his body and kept bursting open. For a time, a faint smell of blood also spread. However, under the suppression of the death qi, it quickly disappeared. Moreover, the deathly aura seemed to have found an opening as it surged towards the wound. Fortunately, there were still a lot of sword intents that broke out of his body and cut the death qi away. They were unable to invade Xiao Yang's body. At this moment, Xiao Yang's brows were furrowed even more because those sword intents were constantly running rampant in his body. They were like horses that had escaped their reins. They were very presumptuous. Chapter 1654. The sword qi was constantly crisscrossing in Xiao Yang's body. It was very violent. Every time the sword qi was slashed out, it was very sharp and terrifying. It made people feel that it was difficult to resist. However, every time the little people in Xiao Yang's body waved their swords, the mystery would fall into a sea of consciousness. Everything was natural. It was as if he could absorb all the divine intent with just a thought. It could be said that those little words were the moves. Their mystery was as if they were engraved in Xiao Yang's sea of consciousness with a sword seal. Even if he wanted to forget them, it was very difficult. Xiao Yang was still a little surprised by such a thing. He did not expect that in these 3,000 small worlds, there would be a mighty figure who could pass down his sword moves. Although Xiao Yang did not know what exactly was going on, he could already guess what was going on in his heart. It was probably some almighty who did not want his sword technique to be lost, so he used his divine will to carve the words and preserve it. As long as the fated person arrived, he could accept this inheritance. However, it was definitely not an easy task to accept this inheritance. If it was someone with a weak strength, they would probably end up dying under this fierce sword intent. Although the sword moves were very exquisite, one could still feel the imperfections in it. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as a flaw. The reason was very simple. Some of the sword moves were intermittent and could not be connected at all. Moreover, some of them were missing some charm. Some important things had disappeared without a trace. It was unknown if something happened when the mighty figure engraved the words, but he was unable to pass down the entire set of sword techniques. Of course, there was another possibility. That was there were many cultivators who came to the tomb of the god of sin. Some of them were lucky enough to come to this stone tablet to comprehend it. They took away some of the sword intent and left behind these intermittent sword moves that were not very powerful. Of course, the second possibility was still higher. If a cultivator wanted to keep something that he was proud of, he would naturally not be stingy. They also wished that someone could accept their inheritance and carry it forward. In the end, if they could engrave words in the wilderness, it meant that they had no other choice but to do so. Immediately, Xiaoyang absorbed most of the words. When he opened his eyes, he exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. The words on the stone tablet were still there and did not disappear at all. However, the charm was simply worlds apart from before. It had to be said that Xiaoyang still felt a little regretful that he could not completely absorb the stone tablet inscriptions. If he had comprehended all of them, he would still feel a little imperfection in his heart because the divine intent in the stone tablet inscriptions was originally incomplete. However, the sword moves left in his heart were also not bad. He could carefully ponder over them. It could be said that Xiaoyang's attainments in sword principle had improved by leaps and bounds just by absorbing a portion of the divine intent from the inscription. Such an opportunity was not big, but it was not small either. If a sky sword realm cultivator encountered this stone tablet inscriptions, the comprehension they could obtain would be extraordinary. It was very possible that they could even take all of the divine intent in it for themselves. Soon after, Xiaoyang stood up and patted off the dirt on his body. Then he cupped his hands and bowed to the stone tablet. Although he did not obtain all of the divine intent in the stone tablet inscriptions, it was still a great gift. Regardless of whether the owner of the stone tablet inscriptions had completely decayed or not, the most basic gratitude was still needed. This was the case in the tomb of the god of sin. There might be opportunities everywhere, but whether you could seize them or not was another matter. No one could say for sure, and it was impossible to be sure. Although Xiaoyang used a long time to find the stone tablet inscriptions, it was only the beginning. Xiaoyang closed his eyes and felt the divine intent he had just obtained. In this short period of time, it had completely fused into one. As long as he made a move, he would be able to display the charm of it. Sword Qi constantly appeared on Xiaoyang's fingertips. It was incomparably sharp. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew, causing the wounds on Xiaoyang's body to hurt. He subconsciously gritted his teeth and his face turned ugly. This tomb of the gods was really a land of death. Even if there were great opportunities, it was difficult to leave a good impression of this place. The origin of the tomb of the gods, no matter how one looked at it, was the burial place of the ancestors of the god realm. All these years, there had been people disturbing their peace. How could they not be angry? Soon, Xiaoyang's expression changed slightly. This was because he felt an inexplicable aura. He was a little annoyed and even a little scared. This state appeared very inexplicably, but once it appeared, it hinted that something was about to happen. That was an instinctive chill. It was also a warning that came from the depths of his heart. Xiaoyang did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. He raised his eyes and looked around. He found that there was a mass of gray fog in front of him that was rapidly surging over. The fog was gray and heavy, making it particularly conspicuous. At the same time, the death aura that emitted was even more intense. Looking at that mass of death aura, Xiaoyang's heart was slightly shocked. He secretly cursed in his heart. What he was worried about still happened. In this lifeless tomb of the god of sin, in this completely enclosed space, monsters unique to this place were born. The reason why it was called a monster was because it was not alive. It could not be considered a cultivator. Of course, because it did not have self-consciousness, it could not be considered a ghost. It could not even be considered a silver spirit. This thing that was born from the death aura could not be tolerated by both the yin and yang realms. It was nothing. It could only be described as a monster. That mass of gray fog quickly landed in front of the stone tablet. Gradually, it turned into a human figure and landed there. That mass of fog that had taken the form of a human was studying the stone tablet in an intoxicated manner. All of a sudden, it seemed to have realized that something was missing from the stone tablet. It abruptly turned its head, and its eyes widened in shock. It was as if the owner of this place was looking at a thief who had stolen its things. The aura that was reflected from its eyes became exceptionally cold. It was as if it was the god of death, incomparably furious. Chapter 1655. The human figure, condensed by the gray fog, stared at the man in white with a pair of dark eyes. From the sword marks on his body, it was obvious that there was no one else here. Who else could it be other than him? After sensing the malice in the eyes, Xiao Yang's theory was directly overturned. This was because monsters nourished by the deathly aura shouldn't have consciousness. However, the humanoid monster he was facing now had spiritual intelligence. It seemed that the monster condensed by the deathly aura still had spiritual intelligence. Presumably, this was also a part of the dead souls. As for which branch it would be divided into, it was hard to say. However, these things were difficult to deal with. It could even be said to be very difficult. Although these dead souls had spiritual intelligence, they didn't necessarily have emotions. As for whether they were like walking corpses, it wasn't clear. Now, Xiaoyang looked as if he was facing a formidable enemy. This was because, no matter how he looked at it, such an opponent was very difficult to deal with. It's you who stole my sword technique? The dead soul seemed to have not spoken for a long time, so it seemed to be a little stiff and stuttering. As soon as this was said, Xiaoyang's heart was beating like a drum. What kind of monster was this? Moreover, this dead soul in front of him could actually speak, and it had the accent of the realm of the gods. Obviously, this dead soul might be a disciple of the realm of the gods who came to the tomb of the gods to look for opportunities. Later on, because it was too quiet, it lost its mind and was trapped in the tomb of the gods. Could it be that this was the legendary tomb keeper? However, this idea was quickly rejected. The reason was very simple. The dead soul in front of him only left behind a soul and no physical body. Presumably, this dead soul's physical body had been completely devoured by the deathly aura. Even if it had a strong soul left behind because of cultivation, although it didn't disappear, it had been completely devoured by the deathly aura. It could even be said that even if this person in front of him was a person of virtue and prestige, the conscience in his heart was probably gone now. All of a sudden, Xiaoyang felt a little sad in his heart. Those who could come to the divine tomb to gain experience all had a bright future ahead of them. However, because he was obsessed with it, he planted a seed of disaster for himself and was unable to leave this world. The obsession in his heart was too strong, causing him to become an existence that was neither human nor ghost. It could be said that this dead spirit was a wake-up call for Xiaoyang. In this place filled with the aura of death, no matter how strong a person's will was, under the eternal erosion, many things would change. I am asking you a question. Did you steal my sword art? The undead spirit roared. Dark wind blew after this furious roar. The death chi also became even stronger and more violent. It was as though it was real as it continued to attack the man who was covered in wounds. The cold wind was constantly whistling, like the whimpering of evil spirits. The sound was very harsh. The atmosphere here was originally very depressing, but now it became even more gloomy and terrifying. It made people's hair stand on end. They instinctively wanted to stay away from this place, which made people feel very uncomfortable. Even though Xiaoyang's mind was already very strong, these strange feelings made his heart become a lot more impetuous. Obviously, this dead spirit also had the ability to stimulate one's mind. Senior, this junior didn't know. Please forgive me. Xiaoyang pondered for a moment and said. Now, Xiaoyang wanted to see if this dead spirit still had a trace of reason. If there was still a little bit of reason, then he would be able to understand some things from its mouth. At least, he would know some things about this divine tomb. He would not be at a loss and not know anything. "Oh, since you stole my things, then it's fine. As long as I extract your soul, then I will swallow it and slowly digest it, and those sword arts will still be mine," the dead spirit said and laughed. For a moment his brutal side was completely revealed. It was as if he had completely lost his humanity. In those lifeless eyes there was also a dark and gloomy atmosphere, but there was a very powerful evil aura constantly emitted. At the same time, after the dead spirit saw the blood flowing out of Xiaoyang's body, there was a trace of burning feeling. It was as if the body of flesh and blood was a good tonic for it, which could only be encountered but not sought. It was like a cat seeing a fish. It was difficult for it to control itself. In the end, the dead spirit had completely lost its mind and was acting purely on instinct. Their instincts came from their obsession when they were alive, but they were more eroded by the death aura and completely turned into monsters. The next moment, the dead spirit waved his robe, and suddenly a cold wind blew, blowing sand and stones. In the blink of an eye, the cold wind turned into streaks of sword intent, constantly shooting toward the man in white. The power was not invincible, and there was not much sharpness, but it was gloomy, and there was a kind of fear and horror that came from the bottom of one's heart. For a time, the world seemed to be strengthening the power of the dead spirit. The sound was like a whimper, piercing one's scalp and shaking one's mind. Although the cold wind-like sword qi had not yet arrived, Xiaoyang had already felt a bone-piercing chill. He did not dare to hesitate and quickly dodged to the side. Xiaoyang wasn't very clear about the undead spirit's cultivation, so he wanted to give it a try and see if he could avoid it. However, the result disappointed him. The sword qi seemed to have completely locked onto him. No matter how he changed his position, it was like a maggot in a tarsal bone. He could not get rid of the entanglement and was constantly being chased. "Senior, you are a person of the God realm. Why did you seal yourself and imprison yourself here because of a sword intent?" Xiaoyang asked loudly. Now, Xiaoyang also wanted to try and see if he could awaken the intelligence of the dead spirit when he was alive. Or maybe he wanted to confirm his inner thoughts and see if these dead spirits had really completely lost their original memories. However, there was still only anger in the eyes of the dead spirit. He was unmoved, and he controlled the sword qi with one hand, constantly chasing after Xiaoyang. The tablet stood there, and now it looked incomparably eye-catching. It could be said that if it were not for the stone tablet with sword intent, this outstanding talent of the God realm would not have been so infatuated with it, and in the end become a ferocious dead spirit. Chapter 1656. The chilly wind whistled, and the sword qi crisscrossed. The white-robed man kept running in the barren wilderness. However, he continued to run around the stone tablet that stood out from the crowd. "Senior, why did you have to give up your bright future in the God realm for a sword intent? Now, you've become neither human nor ghost. Do you think this is your path?" Xiaoyang asked as he ran. Sometimes a person's obsession was very terrifying, especially some people who were so stubborn that even 100,000 bulls couldn't pull them back. In addition, the deathly aura in the tomb of the god of sin could also subtly erode and change a person's mind. After the undead spirit heard the words, "neither human nor ghost," the gray fog on its body rolled. Obviously, it had a great emotional fluctuation. It was extremely dissatisfied with such a statement. How could that brat speak to it in such a manner? Even if it had turned into an undead spirit, it still had some spiritual intelligence. Although the influence of obsession and deathly aura occupied most of it, there was still a small part of spiritual intelligence. This was still not to be underestimated. There was a great change. The gray fog on the chest of the undead spirit was rolling violently. It was as if there was a monstrous anger that was about to be vented. Seeing that the undead spirit had finally changed, Xiaoyang began to speculate in his heart. It seemed that it wasn't completely devoid of any intelligence after all. However, he was sure that he had only used words to provoke the undead spirit. He was afraid that the undead spirit's mind would only become more stubborn because of this. There wouldn't be any improvement. It seemed that there were really many strange things in the tomb of the god of sin. Therefore, Xiaoyang had to be on guard. What I pursue is immortality. What does an ordinary person like you know? The undead spirit roared angrily. Its robe fluttered continuously. Suddenly, gusts of chilly wind attacked continuously. It seemed to be very powerful. Now, the undead spirit was very angry. Wherever the chilly aura passed, it could even flatten a mountain. As long as this place exists, I will exist forever. If you hadn't stolen my sword and tent, I would have brought you to experience the mystery of this place. Now, I must pull out your tendons, tear apart your bones, and eat your flesh and drink your blood in order to vent the hatred in my heart. Spectre shouted furiously. The corner of Xiaoyang's mouth also revealed a trace of a bitter smile. This undead was also a pitiful person. It didn't even realize that it had completely lost its consciousness. Instead, it thought that it had obtained immortality. Without a physical body, he could only survive by relying on the aura of death. If he was in another place, he would probably be annihilated in no time. No matter how one looked at it, it was a very laughable thing to think that one was walking on the great Tao. All of a sudden, Xiaoyang was unable to dodge in time, and a sword qi directly pierced through his body. There wasn't the slightest bit of pain to speak of, but a wound could be seen silently appearing, as if the injury had nothing to do with him. But in the next moment, Xiaoyang cried out in pain. Although the sword qi condensed from the death qi and yin wind did not cause any pain to the body, it still struck the spirit. That kind of pain could be said to come from the bottom of his heart. Suddenly, Xiaoyang's body trembled. This kind of special attack was a bit too insidious and vicious. If he was careless, his spirit might be seriously injured. In the next moment, Xiaoyang no longer ran away. With a fierce shout, a powerful spiritual energy rushed out, and the Imperial Heaven Tower appeared at the same time. It blocked the sword qi formed by the death qi and yin wind, preventing him from being injured. However, Xiaoyang was still having a hard time. His expression was constantly changing because he could feel a deathly aura spreading in his sea of consciousness and beginning to invade his sea of consciousness. Suddenly, Xiaoyang's expression changed drastically. He knew very well in his heart that if he was really invaded by the death qi, once it grew stronger, he might be devoured. At that time, he might be like the undead in front of him, becoming an existence that was neither human nor ghost. He would be trapped in this place forever. Break! Xiaoyang roared in a low voice. Suddenly, a wave of overwhelming righteousness and powerful vitality rose from the bottom of his heart, forcing all the death qi out. Xiaoyang's chest was still heaving up and down, even though he had forced the death qi out of his body. There were too many dangers lurking in the dark. "Senior, I think it's better for you to die early and reincarnate early," Xiaoyang said with a sneer. Of course, this was unrealistic. The undead's final outcome was only to have their souls scattered. There was no such thing as reincarnation. It could be said that under the invasion of the death qi, they had already fallen. Their souls had become filthy, and they had lost their vitality. Naturally, they were not qualified to reincarnate. In the next moment, a bolt of lightning flashed, and the silver lightning spear appeared directly. The long spear constantly flashed with lightning. It looked particularly dazzling, like a ray of light in this gloomy world. It was very unusual. Filthy creatures like the undead had always been afraid of lightning and the like. It could even be said that this power was the best way to restrain the undead. However, as for how effective it was, it could only be known after a fight. After the undead saw the lightning, his expression inexplicably twitched. The death qi on his body seemed to have been affected by some fluctuations. It became a little unstable and restless. Seeing the change in the other party, the The corner of Xiao Yang's mouth also revealed a trace of a smile. It was indeed not much different from what he had expected. "Take this!" Xiao Yang shouted in a low voice. He did not continue to talk nonsense. He waved the long spear in his hand and charged towards the undead without the slightest hesitation. The lightning on the long spear continued to appear, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Its power was unparalleled, as if it wanted to kill all the evil in the world. In Xiao Yang's opinion, only by destroying the souls of these undead would they be truly liberated. What was the purpose of their cultivation? That was to prove their Tao for a smooth path. However, because of the invasion of the death qi, those cultivators who went against the heavens had become pitiful creatures who had almost lost their minds. It could even be said that they had cut off their past, present, and future lives. When the undead saw that the thief was still charging over, he was immediately furious. After letting out a ghost cry, he directly charged over. For a moment, the gray fog continued to rise. It was as if it was real, constantly baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Boom! The spear accurately pierced into the undead spirit's heart, and the lightning continued to twist and turn, bombarding the undead spirit's body. Chapter 16, 57. The lightning seemed to be repelling the undead's power. Its power became even more tyrannical in an instant, and it continued to grow. It was as if it would not rest until the undead was dead. The lightning continued to grow thicker. As it continued to twist, the death aura was also being destroyed at an extremely fast speed. It was falling apart. It could be said that the lightning was unstoppable. The lightning's power was the most tyrannical, and it hated the death aura the most. Therefore, when it exploded, it was especially violent. It was as if the world had changed color. A trace of astonishment appeared in the undead spirit's eyes, because he saw his own body constantly dissipating. Although there was no clear pain, an inexplicable sense of emptiness emerged, making him feel as if he was about to disappear. It was as if the immortality in the legends was getting further and further away from him. It was as if he would disappear in the next moment. How could the undead be willing to dissipate just like that? Soon after, an angry roar was heard. Immediately, the gray fog began to surge wildly like waves. Each wave was stronger than the previous one. As it surged, its aura became stronger and stronger. The gray fog became even stronger, and the death aura continued to condense. It turned into sword aura in a frenzy and charged toward the spear-wielding man. For a moment, the whistling sound was like the wailing of thousands of ghosts, resounding through the sky. Bang! The sound continued to ring out. The Imperial Heaven Tower continued to circulate golden light, resisting the attack of the sword aura. However, the power was too tyrannical. Even the Imperial Heaven Tower could not withstand the force, and cracks began to appear on it. Streaks of sword aura began to cut Xiao Yang's body. He had no choice but to sweep his spear horizontally and quickly retreat to put some distance between them. The undead was not in a good state either. The gray fog around his body was now thin, as if it was about to dissipate. Clearly, under the bombardment of the lightning, his vitality had been damaged. "I want you to die a horrible death," the undead roared. Since he appeared here, when had he suffered such pain? It was even to the extent that he'd almost perished and completely vanished from the world just now. The anger in his heart was so strong that he could not wait to skin the man in white alive. Soon after, the dead spirit formed a seal with his hand. Immediately, the surrounding death qi began to gather in a crazy manner. His originally weak aura once again began to become stronger. Immediately, Xiao Yang's expression became extremely ugly. He did not expect this undead spirit's methods to be so high. In this short period of time, he was able to rely on the geographical advantage of this place to quickly replenish his lost body and cultivation. Not long after, the undead spirit's body returned to its original powerful state. At the same time, Traces of flames appeared in its eyes. However, the rising flames were gray in color. If one did not look carefully, they would not be able to tell. "Good lad, do you really think that I can't do anything to you just because you have a divine weapon in your hand?" The undead spirit said arrogantly, and his aura also increased a little. For a moment, the place it was in was like purgatory. Moreover, it was a purgatory without the slightest bit of color, terrifying to the extreme. In the next moment, the undead spirit slapped the ground with his palm, causing the ground to tremble. As for the steel, it soared into the sky and revealed its original appearance. Who would have thought that it was really a sword that was stuck in the ground? The gray fog reached out, and the stone tablet sword appeared in its hand. Immediately, the sword light circulated, and the pieces of stone continued to fall. The sword also gradually revealed its true appearance. However, in that instant, the surface of the treasured sword was wrapped in layers of deathly aura, changing unpredictably. Those remaining words also turned into tiny sword intents that constantly circulated on the treasure sword, looking especially terrifying. Xiaoyang could not help but subconsciously tighten his grip on the long spear in his hand. He knew that he would inevitably have a tough battle ahead. He did not expect this undead spirit to have such a method. It was really a little shocking. The undead spirit, holding the treasure sword, seemed to have sensed something. He became one with the sword and was in high spirits. The undead spirit's body also began to tremble, as if he had not held a sword for a long time. And this time, holding the sword gave him a sense of familiarity that he had not felt for a long time, as if it was a blessing to his soul. Now, Xiaoyang's heart had also become much gloomier because he knew very well that he had to kill in one strike. Otherwise, there would be endless trouble in the future. This undead spirit in this divine tomb was nourished by the death qi. As long as it still had a breath left, it would be able to use the time and place here to quickly recover. This was not just a little bit difficult to deal with. Moreover, if he could not kill it, he would only leave behind a lot of trouble in the future. He would constantly consume his own strength, and in the end he would be exhausted to death. "Boy, feel the fear!" The undead spirit shouted and waved the sharp sword in his hand, directly attacking Xiaoyang. With the help of the treasure sword, the undead spirit's aura immediately became stronger than before. Every time the treasure sword was waved, an incomparably powerful sword qi would appear. The sword qi was no longer sinister and chilling. Instead, it had a sharp edge, which was even more frightening. The treasure sword seemed to have been silent for too long. For a moment, it wished that it could erupt all the sword intent that it had accumulated over the years. Strands of sword qi continued to move horizontally and vertically, carrying an incomparably ancient sword intent, as if it wanted to break through the sky. Although the sword qi had not arrived yet, Xiaoyang could still feel the bone-piercing pain from it. This was the terrifying part of the sword qi. Before it arrived, it was enough to make you fearful and timid. Xiaoyang was definitely not someone who was afraid of fighting. Moreover, he knew that this undead spirit had the advantage of time and place here. Even if he wanted to leave, it was impossible. He did not know how much the undead spirit's strength had increased after pulling out the stone tablet, and how high his cultivation had become. But now, no matter how much he thought about it, it did not seem to be of much benefit. Therefore, Xiaoyang simply did not think about it anymore. He waved the long spear in his hand and directly attacked. For a moment, the thunder seemed to feel provoked. It turned into a thunder dragon and rushed out, bombarding the place where the death qi gathered. Suddenly, the death qi's sharp aura and the violent thunder entangled together. The two completely different attributes, and the forces that hated each other, were now crazily wrestling and killing each other. Chapter 1658. The two forces were clashing with each other, and the sound of explosions was mixed with gusts of cold wind. The two forces were constantly fighting with each other. The undead spirit held a sharp sword in his hand, and the sword intent was constantly sweeping out. The long sword in his hand was constantly slashing down. There was not the slightest bit of agility, but it was extremely domineering. This treasured sword was almost like a broadsword, opening and closing wide, and its power was unparalleled. Every time the sword intent surged, it would leave a ravine on the ground, which looked even more shocking. Right now, the undead spirit seemed to have completely gone crazy. Every time the treasured sword in his hand was waved, it could be said to be like the wind and water, bringing with it an incomparably strong power as it came crashing down. Those streaks of sword intent had now turned into an intense killing intent. It was as if it was unparalleled, constantly sweeping out, and was extremely difficult to deal with. For a time, the sound of metal clashing could be heard. Occasionally, some sparks could be seen, and the aftermath of the impact of waves of power continued to surge out. For a time, the originally barren land was now filled with flying sand and rocks, covering the sky and the sun. The long spear in the white-clothed man's hand was constantly waving. Sometimes it swept across, and sometimes it could be said to be as he pleased. Every time a bolt of lightning flashed, it would cause the gray fog to surge and throb. However, the undead spirit's aura seemed to have become even more violent because of the threat. Not only was it not weakened, it became even more powerful. The undead spirit was also complaining incessantly in his heart. No matter what, he would never have thought that after comprehending the sword intent, the first opponent he encountered would have the power of lightning that countered him. Their strengths seemed to be about the same, but under the comprehensive consideration of various factors, they were indeed about the same. Each of them had their own advantages, but they were unable to fully display them. Therefore, it seemed that the trouble was not small. The battle between the two could be said to be based on who could grasp their own advantage, continuously expand it, and then obtain the final victory. However, no matter from which point, it was extremely difficult. After all, it was definitely not an easy task to obtain an absolute advantage. However, the more Xiaoyang fought, the braver he became. The power in his body was constantly stimulated, allowing the sword intent condensed from the death qi and yin qi to erode his body. However, the power of the long spear in his hand became more and more tyrannical, as if he was about to enter a state of selflessness. Each thunderbolt was stronger than the previous one, becoming thicker and thicker. Compared to the small skirmishes from before, there was a huge change in its might. It even gave people a feeling of invincibility. Even the gloomy gray clouds in the sky began to surge, as if they had sensed the changes below and were about to become thunderclouds. Streaks of lightning flickered incessantly. In such a world, it was extremely dazzling. Although the undead spirit's aura was strong, and the dense death qi here could provide him with an endless supply of energy and repair his body and the strength he had lost. As the power of thunder and lightning grew stronger, it gradually became difficult for him to resist. The long spear waved faster and faster. Even though the undead spirit had the advantage of location, it was still difficult for him to withstand the power he was afraid of. Kill! The undead spirit suddenly let out a low roar and quickly pulled away. The treasured sword in his hand seemed to have sensed the state of mind of the swordsman and immediately began to tremble violently. At this moment, the undead spirit had also poured all the sword intent he had comprehended into the treasured sword. In the next moment, the undead slashed out with his sword. Immediately, countless sword intents surged out once again, even more tyrannical than before. Immediately, countless sword intents roared like demons and ghosts, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws as they charged towards the speck of white light in the gloomy world. Following the slash of this sword, this place immediately became no different from purgatory. The sword intents were incomparably cold and vicious. At that moment, Xiaoyang's brows furrowed slightly. He could also feel the terrifying power contained within it. In fact, Xiaoyang felt rather helpless in his heart. If he were to fight with a cultivator, he would have the advantage of having a strong physical body. However, facing this undead spirit, this advantage was completely gone, as if it was just a decoration. This was because not only could the power of this undead spirit corrode the body, it could also corrode the soul and consciousness. When the sword intents rushed over, he secretly felt that they were not inferior to Luo Ku's 1,000 miles of mysterious ice. In fact, it was even better than that. Break for me. Xiaoyang was definitely not a timid person. On the contrary, this kind of situation caused the blood in his heart to boil. It was just a battle of life and death. Even if he cowered, it might not be effective. Moreover, only after killing the undead would he know how to deal with it. Since such a monster could be born in this place, then the number of undead he would encounter in the divine tomb would be even greater. For a moment, it could be said that the wind was blowing and the clouds were moving, with the silver lightning spear as the center. Streaks of lightning continuously erupted. For a moment, Xiaoyang's surroundings were like a pool of lightning. Because he cultivated the thunder fire sword art, Xiaoyang's comprehension of the lightning element could be said to have reached a higher level. Although his spear technique did not improve, his control of the power of lightning had greatly improved. The deathly aura was constantly being worn down by the lightning, but the remaining sword qi was left behind, constantly slashing at Xiaoyang's body. For a moment, Xiaoyang was in so much pain that he gritted his teeth. However, his advancing pace did not retreat in the slightest. Instead, his speed became even faster. The power on the tip of the spear became even more tyrannical. In the next moment, the long spear flickering with lightning directly pierced into the body of the undead spirit. Immediately, the gray fog began to surge, appearing restless and uneasy. Xiaoyang's face was as cold as ice. The long spear in his hand trembled, and immediately the power of lightning that had been accumulating for a long time exploded at this moment. Immediately, the power continued to surge. Kill! The undead spirit immediately let out a frantic and mournful shriek. Its voice was especially ear-piercing. The gray fog surged and dissipated continuously. Even the deathly aura around it began to dissipate. If one wanted to completely kill this undead spirit, there was only one choice, and that was to eliminate all the deathly aura attached to its soul. As long as the deathly aura had no place to rely on and stick to, it would naturally turn into ordinary, deathly aura and be unable to continue doing evil. Chapter 1659. The gray fog continued to disperse, and the deathly aura continued to diminish. It could be said that because of the silver lightning spear, even the surrounding deathly aura was affected. It was as if it had met its natural enemy and hid far away. Very quickly, the gray mist on the undead spirit's body completely dissipated. The treasured sword formed by the stone tablet fell to the ground and shattered. Under the corrosion of the deathly aura, the sword had already decayed. Now, because of the great battle, it was normal for it to shatter. On the other hand, the sword intent on the stone tablet would probably dissipate because of this and could not be retained. The sword intent comprehension that remained in Xiaoyang's body was still incomplete after all. Soon, Xiaoyang saw the original face of the gray fog's owner. It was a man who looked very strong. He stood there in a daze, and his expression did not change at all. As expected, the soul of the dead spirit was from the realm of the gods. At the same time, Xiaoyang felt that it was a pity. This fellow must have wanted to obtain all of the sword intent so much that he almost forgot himself. In addition to the influence of the deathly aura, his obsession had become even deeper than before. Therefore, in the endless years, he was constantly destroyed and eroded by the deathly aura, until now, there was only a little left of his soul. It was very weak and would not be able to hold on for long. This person was a pitiful person. At the same time, he was also very sad. On the path of cultivation, sometimes if there was a slight deviation, one would fall into a state of eternal damnation. One's soul would even scatter and be annihilated. Soon, the remnant of the soul gradually regained some consciousness. There was some spirit in his eyes, but it was very weak. It was like a candle flame in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. What's going on? The soul was slightly stunned and asked hesitantly. Seeing that his opponent had finally returned to normal, Xiaoyang sighed helplessly. Now, he really couldn't bring himself to kill him. If it was a pure, dead spirit, then the silver spear in Xiaoyang's hand would mercilessly shatter it, and it would never be able to reincarnate. However, Xiaoyang could not be so ruthless. He even pitted the senior in front of him. Why did he have to suffer such a fate in the end? It really made people sigh. Who are you? The remnant of the soul looked at the white-clothed man in front of him. He had never seen him before. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, I am Xiaoyang. I don't know when you entered the tomb of the gods, but I'm afraid it has been a long time. As for the reason, I may be able to explain it to you with my conjecture. Hearing this, the remnant of the soul's eyebrows and his expression was full of doubt. Soon after, Xiaoyang also began to voice his own conjecture. Although he did not see what happened before with his own eyes, he could still make a rough guess. The remnant of the soul only felt that after he comprehended the sword intent, he fell into a deep sleep. He only woke up now, and he did not know what happened during this period. However, as Xiaoyang's analysis continued to show the situation, the remnant of the soul also began to recall some details. The muddle-headed time was probably when he was eroded by the deathly aura. In the end, he completely lost his senses, and his soul had probably been completely eroded. At this time, the deathly aura that was originally forced back by the thunderbolt power quietly spread again. It could be said that the deathly aura was like the air in the outside world, pervasive and pervasive. Previously, the deathly aura was stirred up only because of the relatively high-intensity collision. Now that it was calm, everything naturally returned to its usual state. After listening to the analysis, the remnant of the soul smiled helplessly. He did not expect that a trace of obsession in his heart would turn him into a dead spirit that was neither human nor ghost. My name is Wu Xingliang. Thank you for waking me up. So, please continue to disperse my remnant of the soul. The remnant of the soul smiled and said helplessly. Now, the remnant of the soul also felt that the deathly aura was gathering towards him again. If his soul did not disperse, he would probably turn into a dead spirit again. At that time, he might even attack his own clan and harm his own descendants. I'll remember your name. After saying that, Xiaoyang closed his eyes and pointed the long spear in his hand. The remnant of the soul was annihilated and no longer existed. This method could be said to be very helpless. Due to the erosion of the deathly aura, Wu Xingliang's soul was already very weak. Even if it was not affected, it would not take long for it to dissipate on its own. However, if he did not destroy it now, he would probably turn into a dead spirit due to the erosion of the deathly aura again. Xiaoyang sighed helplessly and laid down on the ground, paralyzed. There were too many strange places in the tomb of the god of sin. Although there were great opportunities here, it was also a land of death. Presumably, the almighty beings of the god realm were all born here. Presumably, it was under such desperate circumstances that they burst out with their potential. That was why it was like this. However, just as Xiaoyang relaxed a little, he felt that the deathly aura had already invaded his body and wanted to corrode his physical body and soul. Immediately, Xiaoyang did not dare to hesitate. He immediately formed a hand seal, and the power in his body began to surge wildly, cleaning up the deathly aura. As for the wounds, they were naturally nothing. They could be easily healed with a little trick. A token suddenly appeared in Xiaoyang's hand. He was now thinking about whether he should leave this hellish place. In this place, there was almost no spiritual energy at all. It was of no benefit to a cultivator, only endless harm. If one really had to say why this place was worth coming, then there was only one point, and that was that in this place there might be opportunities everywhere. If one's luck was good, one might be able to obtain an extremely precious technique. At that time, one would only need to cultivate a little to be able to increase one's strength. Immediately, Xiaoyang got up, put away the token, and continued to move forward. As the saying goes, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Now that there was a great opportunity, Xiaoyang was naturally willing to give it a try. Perhaps he could obtain some special opportunities this time. How could he give up the opportunity that he had fought so hard for? Chapter 1660. He could only sigh when he thought of the pitiful person he had met in front of the stone tablet. Those who could enter the tomb of the god of sin could be said to be the best among King Wu's rank 8 experts. Even if they did not get the opportunity, they still had a very bright future. However, due to various reasons, they eventually lost their minds and became the walking dead of this world. This made Xiaoyang even more aware of how important it was to stay true to one's heart. If he really encountered the opportunity that he desperately wanted, it was better not to waste too much time. Otherwise, he would end up like Wu Xingliang, which was really a sad thing. In the tomb of the god of sin, it could be said that there were some people who could not get out every year, and no one knew how many of them were like Wu Xingliang. The great path was difficult and full of thorns. The slightest carelessness would cause one to fall into the abyss or even lose one's mind and will, and fall from then on. Now, it seemed that the tomb of the god of sin was even more tempting. If one could get out of the temptation, it would be especially important for one's temperament. After getting out, one would definitely be able to gain a lot of enlightenment. However, if one could not resist some emotions, they would probably be trapped in this place forever, and even their souls would completely dissipate without being able to extricate themselves. Also, because he realized the horror of this matter, Xiaoyang was also very careful about resisting the death aura. After all, sometimes a wrong step could leave behind a huge disaster. If there was a crack in his state of mind, then this matter would become even more terrifying, and there would be endless consequences. Xiaoyang still did not speed up his pace and continued to move forward slowly. After all, in the tomb of the god of sin, the appearance of opportunities was really too random. Perhaps the opportunity would not be in those tombs, but in some inconspicuous place, perhaps a stone or a piece of dead wood. In fact, there were even some strange things. For example, if Xiaoyang had flown all the way there before, he probably would not have cared about the stone tablet and would not have gotten some of the sword essence in it. Of course, he would not have attracted the attention of the dead spirit, which would have taught him a good lesson. It was also because Wu Xingliang was not strong enough when he was alive, and after being eroded by the death aura, his strength was not as strong as before. Otherwise, it would not be so easy to deal with them. In the battle with Wu Xingliang alone, Xiaoyang had suffered many injuries. Although he seemed to be fine now, he still needed a few days to fully recover, so he did not dare to be careless. If he neglected a trace of death qi, it would be equivalent to planting a disaster for himself. After walking for a while, Xiaoyang saw some broken walls. After countless years of weathering, they had completely decayed. Under the invasion of the death qi, even magic tools would turn into dust. This showed how powerful the death qi was. Among the ruins, there were 2 skeletons. Their bones were broken in many places. Clearly, they had died from a battle between cultivators. To be able to enter this place, one had to be at least a level 8 King Wu. Therefore, it was normal for skeletons to not rot for tens of thousands of years outside. However, the death qi in this divine tomb was very strong, so it was not easy to determine how long the owner of the skeletons had been dead. After walking into the dilapidated walls, he looked around and saw some strange words. Sure enough, like those stone tablets, they were all passed down with divine intent. It was a pity that the divine intent in these characters had been completely taken away. When Xiaoyang left, he also destroyed the undead spirits that were formed from the remnant souls of the 2 corpses' owners. After all, they existed in this world. They seemed to be eternal, but they had lost their minds. They were just pitiful people, so he might as well help them and let them be completely free. Although there were some more injuries on his body, Xiaoyang did not care at all. He was very confident in the strength of his soul. Moreover, his means were not bad. As long as he found a trace of death chi in his body, he would quickly destroy it with the power of thunder, making it cease to exist. After all, these were existences that could shake the foundation, so the slightest carelessness could not be tolerated. As he continued to walk, it was as if half of this world had been completely searched. Although he could find some strange places or some stone tablets, their divine intent had been taken away. Under the subtle influence, the sword intent that Xiaoyang had obtained had also raised his swordsmanship cultivation by several levels. Even he himself had not realized the profoundness of this. Using the divine will to pass down an inheritance was a very strange thing, because you didn't know what kind of comprehension and form it would take. However, one thing was certain, and that was that it was twice the result with half the effort. It was as if it was a feeling, and it was very easy. During this period, Xiaoyang also found 2 tombs, but they were almost the same as the ones he had encountered before. They had long been looted. There was even a place that was even more miserable. The bones of the tomb owner had been thrown aside, and it was too horrible to look at. Originally, Xiaoyang and Xiaoyang returned the bones to their original positions, but who knew that the bones would turn into dust when he touched them? Obviously, they had been eroded by the wind. Although there are some things left in the tomb, they were all decayed and could not be used. Xiaoyang was not greedy and continued to move forward. After all, the tomb of the god of sin had been explored countless times, and there were not many opportunities left. Therefore, it was impossible to be accurate every time he walked. However, along the way, it was not that he did not gain anything. He also found some words, and those words were no longer strange. They were words that were exclusive to the divine realm. After staying in the divine realm for a few years, Xiaoyang naturally recognized most of the words. From those words, Xiaoyang gradually gained a general understanding of the tomb of the god of sin. In the beginning, this place was not the so-called tomb of the god of sin, but an ancient battlefield. As for who the enemy was back then, it was not clear. What was recorded was that countless divine realm cultivators died in a bitter battle. From those words, one could feel that the battle back then was very intense. However, why did this ancient battlefield become lifeless? Until now, it was purely a land of death, and what happened during this period was unknown. Under the baptism of time, many things had become complicated and confusing. No one had the means to calculate what happened in the ancient times. Chapter 1661. However, the formation of the divine tomb had piqued everyone's curiosity. However, there were several gaps in the formation, so it was definitely not an easy task to find out the truth. Every step the white-clothed man took was extremely steady. Some lightning sparks faintly appeared on his body. Although they were not very dazzling, they appeared like pillars of light in this gloomy world. They were extremely eye-catching. Wherever the white light passed, the death aura would avoid and make a path, not daring to interfere in the slightest. He had been activating the cultivation method to cover the body with lightning to resist the invasion of the death aura. Although it did not consume much spiritual power, it would be considerable if it lasted for a little longer. In addition, the death aura was rampant here, and there was no spiritual power to be found. It was absolutely impossible to recover after the consumption. Even though Xiaoyang also had a lot of elixirs on him that could be used to replenish his spiritual power, he still needed to be careful. After all, what kind of changes would happen next was really unknown. This divine tomb that made people feel incomparably dead couldn't be calm inside. On the contrary, because of the addition of these living people, the strong aura of the cultivators made the inside turbulent again. The place that had been dead for hundreds of years became lively again. These living people, powerful cultivators, were still a great tonic for the undead spirits, made of death aura. Because of Xiaoyang's tyrannical momentum and the support of the lightning element, those weak undead spirits also retreated after seeing him, not daring to take the initiative to provoke him. Whether it was cultivators, beasts, or undead spirits, As long as they had some spiritual wisdom, they would have the instinct to seek luck and avoid danger. After encountering an enemy stronger than them, they naturally did not dare to take risks. They could only retreat to ensure their own safety. They did not dare to be presumptuous at all, especially the power of lightning, which had a natural restraint on these undead spirits. The fear in their hearts made them tremble and afraid. Xiao Yang's walking speed was not very fast, but after walking for more than 1,000 miles, he also found some stone tablets. If he encountered a tablet inscription with divine intent, he would sit down and comprehend the divine intent in it. Although not every tablet inscription could benefit people and give obvious improvement, it was the truth that many little drops made an ocean. Perhaps 1 or 2 steel inscriptions wouldn't be enough to greatly increase one's strength, but if one were to accumulate a lot of them and master them through a comprehensive study, then the increase in strength would not be just a little bit. Since ancient times, there were many cultivators who relied on the divine intent of these tablet inscriptions to start to accumulate in this divine tomb. After leaving the divine tomb, they began to break through to the 9th level in one fell swoop and achieved a supreme status. Of course, there were also many people who were obsessed with these tablet inscriptions, causing them to lose their original heart. Since then, they were eroded by the death aura and turned into undead spirits like Wu Xingliang. In the divine tomb, it was more about tempering one's mind and settling down time and time again. After building a good foundation, it could be used to break through to the next level in one fell swoop, or even to prove the great path. However, under such repressive circumstances, the psychological torture was indeed very serious. Many people did not know the inside story and did not know how powerful it was. In the end, they stayed in the divine tomb forever. It must be said that if the divine tomb did not have such a heavy death aura that it devoured all the spiritual energy and vitality in this place would be a holy land for cultivation. However, there was no such thing as having the best of both worlds in this world. Since there were countless opportunities and great benefits here, there would naturally be some negative things as well. As for how big the divine tomb was, it was unknown. Unrivaled God had mentioned this before. According to the information he obtained from the ancient books, it was more than 100 times bigger than the divine capital. The divine capital was more than 10,000 miles wide. If that was the case, then the divine tomb was 1,000,000 miles wide. Xiao Yang had laughed it off before, thinking that it was impossible. However, now that he knew that this might be an ancient battlefield that had been separated, he felt that it was not strange at all. Countless almighties fought on this land. If the place was not big enough, how could it accommodate them? As for the death chi that permeated this place, it was likely that it had an inexplicable relationship with the battle between the almighties. However, this was only a guess after all. There was no way to verify it at all, so he could only give up on it. The Grand Tao was boundless. In this endless river of time, there were many changes. Who could go and think about everything so clearly? Sometimes it was meaningless to think too much. Instead, it would exhaust one's mind. In the end, one would end up with nothing. That would be a real tragedy and a waste of good time. Along the way, Xiaoyang had also gained a lot. He would encounter some opportunities and obtain some divine decree almost every 100 miles. Although he could not tell exactly what he had obtained, he felt that he had benefited a lot. It was as if he had quietly understood something. Many of the inscriptions on the steels had long been damaged, so how much one could comprehend depended on fate. Moreover, most of the inscriptions on the steels were created by almighties when they were about to die. They were placed on the land in great numbers. Even if he obtained the damaged inscriptions, he would not end up with nothing. Although it seemed that he did not obtain anything substantial, it was more precious than that. This was because it affected a person's temperament and perception, as well as their understanding of certain things. Imperceptibly, some things began to change. On this day, the man in white walked on the barren land. His eyebrows suddenly twitched, as if he had sensed something, and he began to run. The reason why Xiaoyang was running so quickly was because he sensed a very strong smell of blood. Moreover, the trace of life was very weak, like a candle in the wind that was about to be extinguished. It was likely that a fellow cultivator had suffered an intense battle here. Since there were no aftershocks, it was clear that the battle had already ended. In fact, that fellow cultivator might even be on the verge of death. Therefore, he did not dare to relax. When he arrived, he saw a woman lying on the ground with a weak aura and tattered clothes. Chapter 1662. Xiao Yang's thoughts ran quickly, but Wei Beixin was even faster. In the blink of an eye, Wei Beixin had already let go of Wei Beixin's hand, causing the young man, who had already begun to gather his strength, to be unable to control himself. However, the battle was not over yet. To Wei Beixin, this was just the beginning. Like a bolt of lightning, Wei Beixin quickly chased after Wei Beixin. Obviously, he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to decide the outcome of the battle. Although Wei Beixin had consumed a lot of energy just now and his aura had weakened, he was still prepared to forcefully take a breath and seize this opportunity to let the current chief know that it was not enough for a young man to only have a sharp spirit. In front of an experienced and ruthless person, Wei Beixin was indeed very young and could not be a match for him. Of course, these were all unimportant. How to kill this brat who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth was the main point. When Xiaoyang sensed his opponent's swift attack, his heart was filled with shock. At the same time, he was also secretly worried that he would be in a state of being beaten up. This was a very bad situation. Although Xiaoyang already knew how the situation would change, there was no time for him to deal with it. This was because Wei Beixin had already arrived. He appeared above Xiaoyang and immediately fell like a meteorite. Boom! With this kick, Xiaoyang also began to fall at an extremely fast speed. Instantly, that last breath of air was shattered by the kick. In an instant, Xiaoyang could not control himself at all under the bombardment of this huge force. Even his internal organs had suffered quite a bit of impact, and a feeling of pain suddenly attacked him. Suddenly, Xiaoyang felt as if his body was about to shatter, and it was extremely uncomfortable. However, this was not the end. Wei Beixin's falling speed was even faster. In the blink of an eye, he was already below Xiaoyang. Immediately, he threw a punch towards the sky. It could be said that his punch was unstoppable. Even if Xiaoyang wanted to change the situation where he was being controlled by someone else, he was still powerless. Under such a strong falling force and suppression, it could be said that it was difficult to control oneself. Another explosive sound rang out as this punch accurately landed on Xiaoyang's chest. Immediately, Xiaoyang's entire body was sent flying upwards. Wei Beixin still looked as if he hadn't had enough. The smile on his face grew even wider. At the same time, he continued to charge forward, preparing to launch the next round of attacks. Right now, Xiaoyang couldn't control his body at all, so this was the best time to kill him. Therefore, how could Wei Beixin miss this opportunity? Under that punch, Xiaoyang's will was completely shattered. Fortunately, his physical body was strong enough. Otherwise, it would not be as simple as a few broken ribs. Perhaps even his body would have been pierced through alive. This was also what surprised Wei Beixin. He didn't expect that this outsider not only had tyrannical strength, but also had such a valiant physical body. It was truly unbelievable. However, thinking about it made sense. These unorthodox people had always been fighting with their lives on the line, so it was natural for them to have trained a valiant body. It was not surprising at all. Xiaoyang was feeling extremely terrible right now. He knew that if he continued to be controlled and bombarded like this, he would probably be beaten to death. Therefore, he was determined not to let this situation continue. Suddenly, he let out a low roar, and a huge mountain suddenly appeared behind him. However, the mountain couldn't stop Xiaoyang, and he crashed into Mount Tianqin. After seeing Xiaoyang crash into the strange mountain, Wei Beixin's footsteps paused slightly because he didn't know what was going on inside. However, if he rushed in rashly, he might have to pay a price. However, he couldn't just watch as such a great opportunity slipped through his fingers. Therefore, the fearless Wei Bei let out a low roar and rushed in. He would know what was going on once he went in and took a look. It was only when Xiao Yang reached the middle of the Sky Qin Mountain that he stopped retreating. It could be said that he had managed to disperse the huge force. However, before he could adjust his breathing, a powerful aura rushed in. He knew that Wei Bei wanted to kill him, which was why he had rushed over in such a hurry. This person's decisiveness in killing could be said to be one of a kind. However, Xiao Yang wasn't a pushover either. He snorted coldly and kept Mount Tianqin back into his acupuncture point. At the same time, he rushed forward with the silver spear in his hand. It was just a life and death struggle, so what was there to be afraid of? Furthermore, there was no point in continuing to back down now. Therefore, he could only choose to fight now. As for the result, he might still be at a disadvantage and couldn't change the situation at all. However, if he kept retreating, he definitely wouldn't be happy. Therefore, Xiao Yang's choice was very clear. He was going to meet force with force. When Wei Bei Xan saw that Xiao Yang had finally stabilized himself and was now charging at him again like a hothead, a disdainful smile appeared on his face. In his opinion, Xiao Yang had completely lost his mind due to anger, which was why he was charging over without any regard for his life. Otherwise, how could an ordinary person do something like a mantis trying to stop a chariot? However, this was also what Wei Bei wanted. Only by meeting force with force could he fight to his heart's content. Lightning and fist intent exploded once again at this moment, and it was extraordinarily violent. In next to no time, the two of them collided once more. Instantly, waves of aftershock swept out once more, and it was extremely violent. In this collision, Wei Bei fists punched out crazily. Xiao Yang's silver spear kept stabbing horizontally and didn't defend at all. Under such circumstances, Xiao Yang knew very well that he couldn't defend against such a violent attack. Therefore, he only had one choice, which was to exchange injury for injury. No matter how one looked at it, this was an extremely and profitable transaction. However, it could be said that he had no other choice. After all, there were too few opportunities to make a choice sometimes. However, if he fought with his life on the line, there might be some unexpected surprises. Therefore, Xiao Yang was also taking a huge gamble. If he succeeded, he would have a chance. If he couldn't find the slightest opportunity, then he could only choose to escape. Chapter 1663. In this gloomy world, there seemed to be more humanity because of trust. It was not as gloomy and oppressive as before. In fact, there was even a sense of irritation and madness. Xiao Yang walked in front of the lady and tapped her glabella with one finger. A bolt of lightning energy was injected into her glabella. The power of lightning had always been domineering, and its destructive power was unparalleled. However, if it was used well, it could bring spring back to life and save lives. Although it required a lot of control to do so, it was not difficult for Xiao Yang. There was a reason why he did not use a gentler spiritual power. It was not impossible to use a gentler power, but the effect would be too slow. On the other hand, the power of lightning was a natural counter to the deathly aura. It could quickly eliminate the deathly aura and prevent it from retaliating. It had to be said that the Nightmare Thunderfruit was truly a holy item. Just one fruit had allowed Xiao Yang to gain the power to control lightning. Furthermore, it was done so effortlessly, without the slightest delay. As the remaining deathly aura was expelled, Xinfian's face gradually regained its color. The power that was suppressed started to surge from all parts of her body. After eliminating the last wisp of deathly aura, Xiao Yang retreated to one side and adjusted the aura in his body. After the death qi was completely removed, Xinfian also felt refreshed. She felt extremely comfortable, and her mind felt extremely clear. Take some elixirs to heal your injuries. Before you recover, I will not leave, Xiao Yang said calmly. Then he sat on the ground and began to adjust his breathing. Shin Fian looked at the man who had humiliated her cousin in the arena. He did not show any mercy and looked extremely vicious. However, at this moment, he looked as if he was bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. This man's thoughts were truly hard to fathom. With the champion of the outer sect competition protecting her, it was naturally very reassuring. If Xiaoyang really had any improper thoughts about her, he would not have helped her get rid of the deathly aura. Then, Shen Fian sighed inexplicably. She took out a few pills and swallowed them, entering a state of cultivation. Those who were able to enter the divine tomb were all the peak powers of the god realm in the future. Therefore, they naturally received a lot of training. In order to enter the tomb of the god of sin, every force would try their best to provide medicinal pills to ensure that their disciples would be well prepared and obtain more benefits. After a short while, the wounds on Shin Fian's body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Shin Fian was a branch of the royal family, but it was still a relative of the royal family. Therefore, it was not an ordinary family, and the things it could take out were not bad either. Therefore, it was natural that it had a lot of high-quality pills. Xiaoyang had been guarding his heart and didn't take a look. However, the spirit force protecting him had expanded a lot, making the death aura unable to invade the woman for the time being. In this gloomy world, it could be said that the ruthlessness of the great Tao was displayed incisively and vividly. If one was careless, one would be consigned to eternal damnation. In fact, in this place, there was no such thing as sailing against the current. If one didn't advance, one would fall behind. It was even more terrifying than this saying. If a crack appeared in one's Tao heart, it would be infinitely expanded. In the end, it would become a huge chasm and shatter. It could be said that cultivating in seclusion in this place was extremely harmful. Of course, this was only based on the situation of this place, and that was the situation. A few hours passed quietly. Shen Fian's injuries had completely stabilized. Although she had not fully recovered, it was no longer a hindrance. Seeing that Shin Fian was fine, Xiaoyang also slowly got up. He cupped his fists and bowed, saying, "Since you're fine, then let's part ways here." Xiaoyang had never had a good impression of Shen Luo and the others. The reason why he did this was very simple. They were all people who faced the great Tao. Sometimes, when they saw the abyss, they should help each other. It was nothing. Originally, Shen Fian thought that even if the man in front of her had good intentions, he still had some ulterior motives. However, now that he said that they were going to part ways, she couldn't help but feel that she was measuring the heart of a gentleman with her own yardstick. For a moment, Shin Fian was also overshadowed. Looking at this young man who didn't look very stunning, but had some spirit, she couldn't help but feel a little ashamed of her inferiority. Previously, her sense of superiority made Shen Fian think that this bumpkin was just a little lucky. If there was a chance, he would definitely reveal his true colors. But now, it seemed that those groundless thoughts were very laughable. "Don't you want to know why I'm so heavily injured?" Shin Fian hesitated and asked. Xiaoyang shook his head indifferently and said, "It's just a dead spirit. There's nothing strange about it. If you meet one in the future, be careful. If you can't beat it, just leave. If you really can't, then leave. Otherwise, once you lose your Tao heart, you'll be doomed eternally." Saying that, Xiaoyang also thought of that young man. His heart became a lot more gloomy. That kind of result was probably something that many people couldn't accept. Although it was said that the feeling of being in a trance was eternal. Once one woke up, it would be too late for regrets. Perhaps they would regret it for the rest of their lives. If that happened, it wouldn't be a wonderful thing at all. Shin Fian was stunned for a moment. Then she shook her head and said, "I didn't meet a dead spirit. It was a tombkeeper." Hearing that, Xiaoyang frowned slightly. He had heard of the tombkeeper before, but after seeing the dead spirit, he gave up on this idea. "Is it a human or a dead spirit?" Xiaoyang asked doubtfully. He really needed to consider this matter carefully. At the same time, Xiaoyang was also curious. Was the tomb keeper a fallen cultivator who turned into a dead spirit, or something else? Xin Fian shook her head and said, "It's still a human." This piqued Xiaoyang's interest. In the tomb of the god of sin, being a tomb keeper and still being able to resist the invasion of the deathly aura was really a rare thing. "Why don't you come with me and take a look? Won't you find out?" Xin Fian said with a smile. In Xin Fian's opinion, Xiaoyang wasn't weak. Even Xin Luo wasn't his match. With his help, she might really be able to gain some benefits. Now, Xiaoyang was indeed curious. He nodded slightly and said, "Lead the way." The girl was very satisfied with this answer. Chapter 1664. As the name implied, a tomb keeper was a person who guarded the tombs of the deceased sages. Of course, there were some differences in this gloomy world. Most tomb keepers were obsessed with some inheritance or cultivation technique and were unwilling to leave. In the end, they trapped themselves in this world. In other words, a place guarded by a tomb keeper was obviously a place with great opportunities. After all, if it wasn't a great opportunity, how could those cultivators become tomb keepers because of their obsession? It was easy to imagine the key points in this. Back then, Xin Fian had fought with the tomb keeper because she was greedy for the opportunity. However, she knew that the tomb keeper was too strong and was no match for her, so she was seriously injured. After escaping, she lost her strength and was eroded by the deathly aura. She couldn't protect her heart, so she laid there and resigned herself to fate. The girl was lucky to have met someone like Xiaoyang who had the righteous heart of heaven and earth. Otherwise, it was hard to say what would have happened to her. Xin Fian was very happy and excited now. If she joined forces with Xiaoyang to deal with the tomb keeper, she might be able to obtain the opportunity in the tomb. As for how they would distribute it, that was another matter. Xin Fian walked in front. In her opinion, the opportunity seemed to be within reach. Xiaoyang, who was following behind, was also cautious. After all, it was necessary to be vigilant. Moreover, there was still some conflict between him and Shinduo. If the woman in front of him wanted to harm him in the divine tomb, he would probably have to beg the heavens for mercy. In a short while, Xin Fian stopped in front of a big mountain. Looking ahead, she could see the entrance of a cave. The entrance of the cave didn't have any clues, but it looked like it was about to collapse after being exposed to the wind and sun. "You little girl, last time I was merciful and spared your life because you were from the God realm. How dare you come here this time? Do you want to die?" Suddenly, a loud shout came from the cave. That voice was very gloomy. It was as if an evil spirit from the 9 underworlds was berating someone. Hearing the gloomy voice, Xiaoyang's eyebrows furrowed slightly. This was because from the words he could determine that the tomb keeper might still be a human and had not been completely corroded by the deathly aura and lost his mind. Xin Fian snorted coldly and did not take it seriously. This was because the person standing behind her this time was the champion of the grand competition. Therefore, she was even more confident and did not take it seriously. "Hurry up and leave. I'll pretend you never came. If you covet what belongs to me, I will definitely turn you into a ghost in this place." That voice sounded extremely stern and was filled with a trace of killing intent. Whether it was a tomb keeper or a dead spirit, it was all because of a very strong obsession and the invasion of death energy. Therefore, even a person with a good personality could change in the divine tomb. Xin Fian did not retreat. She also looked at Xiaoyang, the person she could rely on now. However, Xiaoyang looked very calm. He did not look like he was facing a strong enemy. It was as if he was not worried at all. Xin Fian's heart calmed down when she saw how calm he was. If Xiaoyang really didn't have any skills, how could he be as calm as he was now? Because of this, Xin Fian became bolder. She had nothing to fear. She felt that no matter how powerful the tomb keeper was, he would not be able to defeat the two of them together. "Since you want to die, don't blame me for being merciless." The tomb keeper berated. He was extremely angry. For a moment, the deathly aura in the area seemed to be attracted and surged. It was very terrifying. An extremely strong, murderous intent rushed towards them. A chilly wind blew, and sand and pebbles were blown away. Xiaoyang was still standing in the same place. He also felt the strong aura rushing towards him. His heart quivered, and the silver lightning spear appeared in his hand. The situation was not clear yet. Therefore, he had to be careful. Moreover, Xiaoyang was also very curious as to how much consciousness the tomb keeper still had, and whether he had reached a point where he could not be saved. However, no matter what, he still had to give it a try. Who knew he might be able to help? Under the great Tao, compassion was essential. Moreover, it was not bad to be able to make another friend. Not long after, an unlucky aura rushed out of the hole. The deathly aura rushed towards them like a demon. It was constantly baring its fangs and brandishing its claws to confuse people's minds. Suddenly, Shen Fian's expression became a lot more nervous. Although she came here with confidence, the previous battle had left an indelible shadow in her heart. Because of that shadow, Shen Fian was afraid that it would become a flaw in her Tao heart. Therefore, she thought of bringing Xiaoyang here to see if he could repair the damage. The gray fog was very thick. However, with their cultivation realm, they could still see some clues. In the gray fog, there was a middle-aged man. He was not very tall, but he gave off a sense of toughness. His spirit also gave off a very strong feeling. However, it was a pity that the man's skin was covered with traces of black aura. This caused his spirit to seem a little sluggish, as if he was a drug addict. However, from the toughness of his bones and the firmness of his flesh, it could be seen that this man's strength was not bad. Perhaps he was a hot-tempered person before this. As for his strength, it was even more undeniable. After all, if he could enter the tomb of the god through the realm of the god's grand competition, how could he enter this place by luck if he did not have real strength? Moreover, they did not know what kind of opportunities this man had in the tomb of the god of gods. Therefore, it was difficult to estimate his current strength. So you brought helpers. No wonder you are so fearless. You have forgotten the pain after the scar has healed. The man sneered and said disdainfully, in the man's opinion, so what if this woman brought helpers? She was just here to die. For his own peace, he would kill these two people. When the time came, it would naturally be quiet and no one would be able to disturb his cultivation. In this way, his killing intent was even stronger. Chapter 16, 65. The tomb keeper's thoughts were rather simple. In addition, due to his stubbornness, he was even more worried that others would covet his opportunity. Thus, his expression was extremely ugly, and his anger began to rise. Fellow Taoist, how long have you been in the tomb of the god of sin? Xiaoyang smiled bitterly as soon as he asked the question. There was no need for him to ask this question. There was no day or night in the tomb of the god of sin. No matter what time it was always gloomy. Therefore, it was a huge project to calculate the time here. It required a lot of patience to do so. When one first came in, it might be possible to calculate the exact time carefully. However, as time passed and more things were experienced, these calculations would naturally not be valid. Furthermore, there would be many mistakes. The man looked at the man in white, and a disdainful smile appeared on his face. However, compared to the woman's domineering attitude, the man's attitude was really different. I like you and don't want to have a conflict with you. Leave quickly. The burly man waved his hand and said. The burly man only wanted to comprehend the great Tao here. Hence, he was naturally willing to have less trouble. Moreover, he was not a bloodthirsty person. That woman's repeated visits had truly infuriated him. All of a sudden, Xiaoyang's eyebrows twitched slightly. The consciousness of the man hiding in the gray fog could still be considered to be awake. Obviously, he had not completely lost his mind under the attack of the deathly aura. In this case, he was not hopeless. I'm Xiaoyang. May I know your name? Xiaoyang cupped his hands and said, Seeing the other party salute, the burly man said casually, "Ji Fei." At this moment, Shen Fian's heart was pounding. She invited Xiaoyang over to deal with the tombkeeper and obtain a great opportunity. Now the two of them were chatting. Although Shen Fian was unhappy, she knew very well that she was no match for the tombkeeper. To put it bluntly, they had to rely on Xiaoyang to enter the tomb and explore what kind of opportunities were inside. Even though there was some anger in his heart, he could not vent it out. It could be said that he was very sullen. Xiaoyang pondered for a moment and smiled with satisfaction. The tombkeeper's consciousness was still sober, but he didn't know how much his consciousness had been affected during this time. "Leave quickly. Don't test my patience." Ji Fei spoke in a displeased tone. His ruthless aura could not be hidden. Clearly, he had a great opinion about this. At this moment, Ji Fei was also a little annoyed. He felt that these guys were completely testing his patience. Furthermore, the irritation in his heart could no longer be suppressed. He wanted nothing more than to let their blood splatter on the spot. Xiaoyang shook his head indifferently and said, "Why bother? Since you have been meditating here for 1,000 years and have not gained anything, why don't you take it lightly and leave now? Don't fall into the role of a tombkeeper. I'm afraid it will be too late for regrets." Suddenly, Xiaoyang changed the topic. He was no longer as gentle as before and even became a little tough. As for the 1,000 years, it was just Xiaoyang's calculation. Perhaps Ji Fei's mind was strong enough to withstand the invasion of the deathly aura for 1,000 years without degenerating into an undead spirit. However, it was hard to say how long he would last. Moreover, 1,000 years was a great mental torture for a person. Therefore, it was naturally the best choice to leave now. After hearing this, Ji Fei flew into a rage. Suddenly, the gray fog around him surged as if it was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Originally, he advised this ignorant brat to leave quickly and was unwilling to take action. However, he did not expect this brat to be so ignorant and even advised him to leave this place. Did he really think of himself as someone important? How could he be so presumptuous and bold? He even advised him to leave the tomb of the god of sin. Did he want to monopolize the opportunity? How could there be such a good thing in the world? Xiaoyang gasped when he felt that Ji Fei's aura had suddenly become tyrannical at this moment. The murderous aura and anger were not concealed at all. Presumably, his words had hurt Ji Fei's heart and caused his emotions to fluctuate. From the looks of it, this battle was unavoidable. However, if he could pull this man out of the abyss, it would be fine. For a moment, Shen Fian looked very nervous. She had experienced the power of the man in front of her, so she did not dare to be careless. With a flash of light, a sword appeared in her hand. "Fellow cultivator, this is the way of heaven. How could you not know that you have been attacked by the deathly aura in the tomb of the god of sin? You have been here for thousands of years. It is impossible that you have not seen those dead souls. You don't know what happened to them. Why are you so stubborn?" Xiaoyang said righteously as he stepped forward. In the face of this interrogation, Ji Fei's emotions fluctuated even more. The surging gray fog was like rolling thunderclouds. It was extremely intense. When he heard those words, his heart trembled a few times. However, he soon made up his mind. This brat in white wanted to lure the tiger away from the mountain for the opportunity behind him. As for the opportunity in the tomb, it belonged to him. The two people in front of him were completely robbers who wanted to rob him of his things. For a moment, his emotions were like rolling waves. They were turbulent and difficult to calm down. The deathly aura in the surroundings seemed to have sensed the changes in the surroundings. It suddenly became active. The gloomy aura also became denser. It was bone-piercing. Nonsense! Ji Fei shouted angrily and stomped his foot, causing the ground to tremble. In an instant, the remaining trace of clarity in Ji Fei's mind was quickly swallowed up by his anger. His pupils seemed to be burning with flames. However, the flames were very strange. They were not red, but black and gray. It looked very strange. Seeing this scene, Xiao Yang was also shocked. Soon after, he sighed helplessly. Ji Fei had not expected to lose his last bit of rationality in his anger and be devoured by the deathly aura. If it were not for their appearance, Ji Fei would not have been so agitated. Now he had lost his last bit of rationality and became ruthless. Chapter 1666. For a moment, Xiao Yang felt a little guilty. If he had not provoked the man with his words, the man's mind would not have been completely corroded and he would still be conscious. However, Xiao Yang could not be blamed because 1,000 years was a long time. Even though Ji Fei's mind was firm, it was almost worn down. Even if he did not have a big emotional fluctuation today, it would not take long for Ji Fei's mind to be completely corroded. When that time came, he would really fall into a state of eternal damnation. Although Ji Fei had completely lost his mind, if he still had a little bit of clarity in his mind, it was not impossible to save him. At least, Xiao Yang was willing to give it a try. If you really can't handle it, just avoid it. He has completely lost his mind now, so he will not hold back when he attacks. You might not be able to handle it. Xiao Yang's expression became very cold as he said in a deep voice. Hearing this, Xin Fian was slightly shocked. Of course, she could also feel that the tombkeeper had completely lost his mind. It would not be a wise choice to fight him head-on. Moreover, with her ability, it would be difficult for her to block it. Moreover, Shen Fian's injuries had not recovered yet. Now, she could not use her full strength, so she was naturally weaker. Can you handle it alone? Xin Fian asked worriedly. After all, Shen Fian had already experienced how powerful Ji Fei was. Moreover, perhaps because he had held back previously, he did not use his full strength. The strength displayed by the sparring and the unconscious life and death battle were not on the same level. Xiao Yang nodded slightly and said, "You hold the line. Be careful not to let the other dead souls take advantage of the situation." Hearing this, Xin Fian nodded slightly and quickly flew to the back. Even though she could not bear to do so, she was well aware of her own capabilities. Under such circumstances, there was not much she could do to help. If she was not careful, she might even make a mistake and become a burden. Seeing Shen Fian retreat, Xiao Yang also took a deep breath. In the next moment, he was full of energy. Now that Xiao Yang wanted to help Ji Fei, there was only one choice, and that was to defeat him and remove all the death qi that had invaded his body. Perhaps this way he could even save his life. However, if the death aura had completely eroded Ji Fei's soul, then there was no other way but to destroy his soul. After taking a few steps, Ji Fei rushed over at a very fast speed. The gray fog followed closely behind. In the next moment, Xiao Yang let out a low shout and waved the long spear in his hand. He pointed in different directions, and countless thunderbolts surged out. Every bolt of lightning struck in all directions. When they landed on the ground, they grew rapidly as if they had taken root and sprouted. Then they shot towards the sky. At this moment, Ji Fei had already arrived. He raised his fist high and smashed it down on his opponent's head. Ji Fei was originally one of the King Wu rank 8 experts 1,000 years ago. His strength was undeniable. In addition, he had comprehended for 1,000 years in the tomb of the god of sin and obtained a lot of fist essence. This punch was enough to smash the head of an ordinary rank 8 expert of King Wu rank 8 into mush. Before the punch arrived, the wind from the punch had already arrived. That strong sense of oppression almost made people unable to lift their heads. It was as if their heads were hanging on the ground. A chill rose from the bottom of their hearts. When Xin Fian, who was watching from afar, saw this, she turned pale with fright. As the saying goes, an expert knows the ropes. She could still see the situation clearly. The power of Ji Fei's punch was so terrifying. Even the number 1 on the hidden dragon roll of the realm of the gods, Shen Luo, might not be able to throw out such a powerful punch. Even Shen Fian, couldn't bear to continue watching. Although Xiaoyang was the champion of the grand competition, compared to the senior who had comprehended for 1,000 years in the tomb of the god of sin, he was still a far cry. Therefore, she started to consider if she should run away now. However, this punch hit nothing. Xiaoyang used the 7 steps of the barbarian god and quickly moved back. Only then did he manage to dodge this fatal punch. However, the wind from the punch hit his chest. It hurt a little, but it was not a big deal. Although Ji Fei's punch hit nothing, it hit the void. Instantly, the explosion of power caused the space in that area to tremble and shatter. After this punch hit nothing, Ji Fei immediately took a deep breath and continued to press forward. He was prepared to suppress this cultivator who was coveting his treasures. If he did not kill him, how could he warn those with ulterior motives not to covet his treasures? Therefore, the anger in Ji Fei's heart became even more intense. Xin Fian, who was at the side, also heaved a sigh of relief. The situation just now almost scared her to death. Fortunately, Xiaoyang's strength was also from fighting his way up. He had rich battle experience and was very clear on when to use the most suitable method to fight back. He would not fall into a situation where he could not recover from it. The lightning that fell from the surroundings also started to grow crazily like a big tree. Ji Fei did not seem to notice the changes in his surroundings at all. Instead, his fists became even more powerful and continued to attack. Xiaoyang relied on the ingenuity of the 7 steps of the barbarian god to barely dodge these attacks. However, he was unable to completely dodge some of the wind from the punch and gangqi. Therefore, he was still hit by quite a bit of impact. The impact caused the blood in his body to churn and was difficult to suppress. All this while, Xiaoyang did not counterattack. The long spear in his hand was constantly moving around, causing lightning to fall from the ground. The lightning that fell rapidly started to take root and grow crazily. When Shen Fian saw this, she felt that Xiaoyang might be setting up some kind of formation. Therefore, at this time, he was blindly avoiding the attack and did not fight Ji Fei head-on. Every punch landed on the void. Immediately, Ji Fei was very unhappy. However, he did not have the ability to change the situation. He was instantly enraged, and his evil aura was even stronger than before. Every step Ji Fei took shook the ground and the mountains. It was obvious how powerful the power he displayed was. After a while, the lightning in the surrounding area also began to rapidly converge and intertwine with each other, shining brightly. In less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea, those thunderbolts formed a huge electric net. Chapter 16:67. The lightning net that was formed by lightning spread out rapidly at this moment, covering a radius of 10 miles. It was very magnificent and vast. It could be said that it was endless. Its power was also not bad. In this dark world, it was like a huge ball of light. It was very dazzling, blooming with a unique light. It was incomparably vast. The gray, deathly aura crackled when it came into contact with the electric net. It was bombarded and disappeared without a trace. The surrounding deathly aura seemed to feel threatened and began to retreat. The deathly aura in the electric net was constantly being consumed and destroyed. Xin Fian looked at the huge electric net and could not feel anything special about it. Suddenly, she felt very strange. Xiaoyang spent so much effort to create this electric net. What exactly was its purpose? This was really difficult to understand, and it was difficult to understand the reason behind it. In fact, the reason why Xiaoyang set up this electric net was very simple. It was to completely isolate the deathly aura in this place, so that it would not be able to become Ji Fei's strength. This method could be said to be cutting the firewood from under the cauldron. Of course, more importantly, it was to prevent more deathly aura from invading. It was necessary to control everything here and avoid some drawbacks that would lead to unpredictable consequences. After the electric net was completely spread out, the gray fog on Ji Fei's body began to surge violently. It was as if it was threatened by its natural enemy. It was trembling in fear and terror. No matter what kind of power it would restrain and fear each other. Therefore, the deathly aura was now so fearful that it was even on the verge of collapse. Even Ji Fei felt very uncomfortable. It was as if some power in his body was constantly agitated and was about to burst out. This made him very restless. That feeling of irritation became even more intense in an instant. It was even to the extent that he wished for nothing more than to shatter this expanse of the heavens and the earth with a single punch. In this way, he would be able to leave this uncomfortable cage. Seeing that Ji Fei was starting to become restless, the smile on Xiao Yang's face became wider. This was the result he wanted. It seemed that the power of lightning still had a strong suppressive effect on the opponent. Therefore, he did not need to use too many trump cards to defeat Ji Fei. However, whether or not Ji Fei could be saved in the end was another matter altogether. In fact, he could only do his best and leave the rest to fate. It could be said that this also depended on whether Ji Fei's ability to survive was strong enough. No matter what, it was still worth a try. Perhaps this attempt could succeed and save Ji Fei's life? That manic feeling made Ji Fei unable to control his temperament. He roared angrily and immediately, as if he was possessed, launched another attack. Every punch seemed very simple, but the power contained in it was incomparably tyrannical. With a single punch, it was enough to shatter a mountain and turn it into powder. Xiao Yang had completely set up the place as he had imagined. He frowned slightly and did not show the slightest sign of retreating. Instead, he directly waved his long spear to meet Ji Fei's attack. Admittedly, his opponent was very strong, but the sacred grade magic treasure in his hand was not to be trifled with either. Bang! Bang! Sounds of impact rose and fell one after another. Under the loud noise, it was even more shocking. Every time Ji Fei's punch landed on the long spear, there would be a loud explosion. The power of every punch was extraordinary and unparalleled. Even though Xiao Yang's strength was not weak, it was still somewhat difficult for him to parry, and he was forced to take a few steps back. However, it was enough as long as he could restrain his opponent. After a few punches, some wounds appeared on Ji Fei's fists under the bombardment of the lightning on the body of the spear. Even though his skin and flesh were lacerated, there was not much blood to be seen. It was a shocking sight that did not conform to common sense. Of course, this was understandable. The deathly aura first devoured flesh and blood. Ji Fei had not completely fallen into the abyss for thousands of years. Most of the time he had been burning his own blood essence to maintain his consciousness. Now his blood essence could be said to be deathly aura and not his own blood. As the long spear was waved continuously, the lightning danced and bombarded. The gray fog around Ji Fei also began to disperse layer by layer. Under the attack of the lightning, it was scattered in all directions. Finally, it was completely dispersed by the surrounding lightning. Xinfian, who was standing at the periphery, could barely see what was happening inside. Although Xiao Yang was suppressed, his aura did not weaken in the slightest. On the contrary, the burly man called Ji Fei's aura had weakened a lot. Furthermore, the strange gray fog had dissipated without a trace. Now they even saw Ji Fei's true face. Now it could only be described as a ghastly sight. His skin and flesh had almost completely turned jet black, and his face was extremely dispirited. Moreover, his eyeballs were deeply sunken, and his appearance could only be described as miserable. The sword-wielding woman could not bear to continue looking at his inhuman and ghostly appearance. Suddenly, she thought of her previous predicament. If it wasn't for Xiao Yang's help, she might have ended up like Ji Fei. Thinking of this, Xinfian's heart was about to break down. No matter how one thought about it, such an outcome was incomparably terrifying and frightening. Fortunately, heaven took pity on her and gave her a ray of hope. She would not become a walking corpse in the tomb of the god of sin. Previously, Shun Fian had heard from her father or uncle about the dangers in the tomb of the god of sin. Initially, she did not think much of it. However, after experiencing it firsthand these days, words were not enough to describe the devastation of this place. It was said that the tomb of the god of sin was a great place with great opportunities. It was the holy land in the hearts of almost every cultivator in the realm of the gods. However, who knew that there was so much filth in the tomb of the god of sin? It could be said that the tomb of the god of sin was not suitable for a cultivator to cultivate in. If it were not for the many techniques left behind, this place would have been completely forgotten and abandoned. Ji Fei was very irritated now. When the lightning struck his body, there was an intense, burning pain. It was as if his soul was being whipped violently. Chapter 1668. As the deathly aura was constantly depleted, Ji Fei's state of mind also began to change. Under the pain, his state of mind became even worse for a while. That feeling of being driven mad was very uncomfortable. He wished he could directly destroy all the people or things in front of him. That way, he might feel better in his heart. However, no matter how crazily Ji Fei attacked, the white-clothed man before him simply stood there without falling. Even though Ji Fei accidentally took 2 punches, he only staggered a few steps back, then immediately pulled himself together and continued to attack. Furthermore, the power of the lightning caused him to feel extremely vexed. As the deathly aura was constantly depleted, Xiaoyang was now much calmer. As long as this guy did not replenish his energy, his power would be endless. On the contrary, after the deathly aura was depleted, the power that he could control would be even more insignificant. After thousands of years of wear and tear, it was already difficult for him to guard his heart. So how could he replenish his spiritual power? For a moment, the two of them were also engaged in a fierce battle. The majestic fist intent and the fierce thunderbolts collided continuously, causing deafening sounds to be heard. Wave after wave of energy ripples continued to spread out. In a short while, the ground beneath the two of them could be said to be devastated. Many potholes of various sizes had appeared, and there were countless of them. In this entanglement, Ji Fei, who had lost his mind, relied on his instincts and directly rushed towards the lightning net. It was obvious that he wanted to directly rush out of this sealed place. Now that the deathly aura in Ji Fei's body was in a state of exhaustion, it would be difficult for him to exert his full strength if he did not get replenished. In addition, there was no deathly aura, and with the surrounding thunderbolts, it was as if he was being roasted in a sea of fire, which was extremely uncomfortable. Therefore, he could only stake everything on one throw and rush out of this place first. It could also be said that the deathly aura was controlling Ji Fei's body to do the most instinctive thing. The corners of Xiaoyang's mouth curled up into a proud smile. Ji Fei was now in a mess. Moreover, if they continued to fight, the deathly aura would be depleted more and more. By then, there might be some changes in Ji Fei, and it was not impossible for him to recover his consciousness. With that thought, Xiaoyang's eyes lit up, and he immediately flashed and blocked Ji Fei's way. At the same time, the silver lightning spear in his hand did not hesitate at all, and it was like a blow to Ji Fei's head. Ji Fei immediately crossed his hands and made a blocking action, which was how he managed to block the attack. But in the next moment, a huge force came and Ji Fei's entire body fell to the ground. Since Xiaoyang had put in so much effort to create this situation, how could he let this guy rush out so easily? Right now, Ji Fei was like a drug addict who was craving for a breath of fresh air. He was running amok. He felt that if this continued, he would suffocate. However, Xiaoyang would not give him such a chance. With the subtlety of the barbarian god's 7 steps, he constantly changed his body, and with the power of the silver lightning spear, he completely blocked Ji Fei's way out. The situation could be said to have changed in the blink of an eye. Originally, Ji Fei had been suppressing Xiaoyang, but now the situation had changed so drastically that it was completely reversed. Xin Fian, who was standing at the side, had calmed down a lot. She also laughed bitterly at herself, because she had never thought that she would rely on an outsider whom they ridiculed in this place. Some of the words she had said before were simply ridiculous. At this moment, she could not help but laugh. Sometimes wishful thinking on one's part was indeed very scary. Back then, Zhang Xuanyi humiliated Xiaoyang at Jade Pool in order to show off. In the end, he left the 10 Directions 8 Wastelands map and was severely injured. He was still lying in bed until now. In fact, if he wanted to cultivate again, he would need at least 10 years of nourishment. Shen Luo looked down on Xiaoyang and lost his position as the champion. This outsider seemed to have not said anything all this time. Most of it was just some people's guesses. However, he had always been doing things. It seemed that he did not look so annoying anymore. After several attacks, Ji Fei was still unable to break through the defense line. He was still suppressed and could not leave this place at all. His soulless eyes were completely covered by hatred. It was as if he was completely enraged to the extreme. He kept roaring on the spot as if he was demonstrating his power. Right now, Ji Fei seemed like a beast without intelligence. He constantly bared his fangs and claws in an attempt to force back his enemies in exchange for his own safety. Soon, Ji Fei stopped roaring, and his hands began to quickly form a seal. At this time, the remaining spiritual power also began to gather quickly. Seeing this scene, Xiaoyang's eyebrows twitched slightly as he began to mutter in his heart. This was because he did not know if Ji Fei was retaining his instincts or if his consciousness was still a little sober. However, he could sense that this guy was going to give it his all. It was like a drug addict wanting to get what he craved. At that time, he had no way to control himself at all. He would do everything he could. As long as he could get a whiff, he would be incomparably satisfied. All of a sudden, the surrounding temperature dropped by a lot. In this gloomy world, there was already some gloomy coldness. But now, the coldness was even more bone-piercing. Even Xiaoyang could not help but shiver unconsciously. He was extremely shocked. Suddenly, a thin layer of ice appeared on the ground under his feet at an extremely fast speed, and it quickly spread to the surroundings at an extremely fast speed. In fact, even some of the moisture in the air turned into ice beads in an instant and fell to the ground with a crisp sound. Ji Fei stood there like an ice sculpture, and the endless coldness was continuously emitted from his body. Xiaoyang subconsciously took a few steps back and floated in the air to avoid being frozen. This feeling was extremely familiar. Back then, when he faced the young man with snow-white pupils in the arena, he was extremely cold. 1,000 miles of mysterious ice. Chapter 1669. Wisps of cold air constantly drifted out. They looked light, but they were extremely dangerous. In a short while, a layer of ice that was half a foot thick had condensed under their feet. Even the air seemed to have become heavier because of the coldness, as if it was made of black iron. When one took a breath, the coldness was as sharp as sword qi. It could be said that it pierced one's heart and lungs, causing unbearable pain. Xiaoyang had seen such a technique before, so he knew how terrifying it was. This was the work of Sun Snow Realm's Luoku. From this, it could be deduced that this Ji Fei was a cultivator from the Sun Snow Realm from the spell he used. Moreover, he probably had an unusual relationship with Luoku. If one was not a core member of a sect, one would not be qualified to cultivate such a powerful technique. He did not expect the tomb keeper to be from Sun Snow Realm. At the same time, the coldness from the black ice was even more terrifying. Compared to Luoku's 1,000 miles of black ice, it was much stronger. It could even be said that it was much stronger than Luoku's. At the very least, in terms of attainment in this technique, the power that Ji Fei displayed was much stronger than Luoku's. The black ice on the ground became thicker and thicker. Even the air was filled with ice fog, appearing thicker and thicker. 1,000 miles of black ice did not seem to be a technique with great lethality, but like a formation, it had endless mysteries. It could increase one's strength, but at the same time, it could greatly restrict one's opponent. Xinfian, who was watching from afar, suddenly had an ugly expression. Back then, she had also watched the battle between Xiaoyang and Luoku. However, the means displayed by Ji Fei were simply too powerful. For example, the condensed ice was very different from the other ice cubes. Even though she was far away from the battlefield, Xinfian could still feel a bone-piercing coldness. It was even more uncomfortable than being naked in the ice and snow. Even the lightning net was frozen at an extremely fast speed at this moment, turning into an ice sculpture. It looked very beautiful. Even though the power of the thunderbolt was extremely tyrannical, it was sealed by the mysterious ice. For a moment, the shock in Xinfian's heart could not be any greater. How terrifying was this guy's strength? Could it be that he was a powerful ninth-stage existence? If Qingwu was really at the 9th level, then even if she teamed up with Xiaoyang, they might not be a match for him. Xinfian's heart wavered again. Now, it could be said that he was facing a formidable enemy. At the same time, the cold air was also very heavy and overbearing. After the lightning net was turned into ice sculptures, the death aura became restless and wanted to invade. However, they were also frozen into ice mist and turned into pearls that fell to the ground, unable to move forward at all. The cold air was oppressive, blocking the death energy. After seeing this scene, Xiaoyang had some guesses in his heart. He guessed that Ji Fei's ability to stay true to himself was inextricably linked to the cultivation technique that he cultivated. That was the truth. Ji Fei did indeed rely on the mysteries of his cultivation technique to preserve his last trace of consciousness and not be completely corroded by the death energy and become a walking corpse. However, now that his consciousness had been frozen, it was indeed because of this that he was lucky enough to have a chance of survival. King Wu was an 8th-stage expert. As long as he walked out of the realm of the gods, no matter where he went, he was a figure that could establish a sect. How could he not have some life-saving methods? Some methods could be said to be unavoidable. The drifting cloud realm was a remote, small world. It was even more pitiful. Previously, King Wu was an 8th-stage expert and did not exist. Later on, when Xiaoyang started to go out to train, he brought back Baldi and Chen Mingho. Hence, there were 2 more powerful people. The only local powerhouses were the Xiao clan's great-grandpa and Chu Taiyin. They were only level 7. Even Xiaoyang only reached 8th stage after coming to the realm of the gods. Therefore, 8th stage experts were still more important outside of the realm of the gods. At this moment, the area within a radius of 10 miles was completely covered in ice. Even the air was filled with ice mist that was close to becoming ice cubes. It was extremely heavy. Ji Fei looked at the cultivator who forced him to the brink of death. The monstrous anger in his heart could not be suppressed. Hence, he displayed the martial technique that he was most proud of. Although it was an instinctive move, he had been practicing this technique for more than 1,000 years. His attainment in it had long reached the peak. It could be said that it was easy to grasp. As Ji Fei pointed with his finger, suddenly, streaks of ice appeared and turned into flying arrows. With an extremely dense attack, they shot towards the abominable man in white. Every flying arrow carried with it the sound of breaking through the air. It was very crisp and clear, like the chirping of birds. Those flying arrows looked transparent and beautiful, but they were filled with murderous intent. If this round of attacks were to hit, even King Wu, a 9th stage expert, would be pierced into a hedgehog. When that time came, the chill would burst forth and seal his blood vessels. He would only be able to freeze to death. After experiencing the power of this technique, Xiaoyang was especially vigilant. What's more, the spells cast by different people were even more extraordinary. The silver lightning spear was waved continuously. The position of the lightning was also constantly appearing with loud noises. The lightning was like a huge dragon. It was constantly twisting its body and displaying its tyrannical divine might. The surrounding ice mist was all blown into nothingness. The dense flying arrows were all stirred up and bombarded into fragments. Those fragments were also constantly moving forward. Under the lightning, it was inevitable that some would slip through the net. The illusory image of the Imperial Heaven Tower continued to appear and block all the ice shards. Although the flying arrows were completely shattered, the power within could not be underestimated. Many dents had appeared on the Imperial Heaven Tower. It was obviously caused by the impact of the power. The long spear was waved continuously. The sound of the air breaking rose and fell one after another. Lightning flashed, and the cold light was chilling. Ji Fei stood there. His eyes looked unusually cold. It was as if there was only a burst of coldness in his world. The entire world would turn into an ice sculpture, according to his will. Of course, if one could cultivate the 1,000 miles of mysterious ice to the extreme, it was even possible to freeze a small world. However, only people in the sun, snow realm could do it. Chapter 1670. In a short while, the Imperial Heaven Tower protecting Shaoyang was on the verge of collapsing and was on the verge of shattering. The brilliance that it emitted also became much dimmer and could be said to be on the verge of collapse. If it continued to hold on, the heaven-level magic treasure would probably be destroyed in an instant. In the next moment, the Imperial Heaven Tower directly disappeared. However, in this short period of time, countless ice shards directly broke through Shaoyang's protective magic treasure and directly hit his body. Those ice shards could be said to have turned into an endless chill in an instant and directly invaded his body. They began to wander wildly, preparing to freeze his heart meridians and essence blood. Suddenly, Shaoyang's aura became much weaker because of this. In the previous battle, in addition to the lightning net formed in order to expel the deathly aura, he had consumed a lot of spiritual energy. Now, it was still somewhat difficult for him to expel the chill. The battle could be said to be full of twists and turns. Shaoyang, who originally had the upper hand, was once again suppressed. Facing such a terrifying opponent, he was also suffering in his heart. Although Shaoyang could sense that his opponent was still an 8th level Martial King, he was still able to sense that his opponent was still an 8th level Martial King. However, the strength that he displayed now was almost no different from a rank 9 cultivator's attack. Such an opponent was really incomparably difficult to deal with. Thinking of this, Shaoyang also gritted his teeth and immediately distanced himself while preparing for the next counterattack. After all, it was not a good idea to be suppressed all the time. Moreover, due to the 1,000 miles of mysterious ice, the opponent could be said to have the advantage of time and place. As long as he continued to exhaust, it would be enough to exhaust Shaoyang to death. Therefore, it was not a wise move to continue wasting time like this. However, when Shaoyang retreated, his speed obviously decreased by a lot. Even his body looked a little stiff and did not have the slightest agility to speak of. As such, it could be seen that the chill had caused him a lot of trouble. Even so, he could only grit his teeth and persevere as he continuously waved the silver lightning spear in his hand. Shen Fian's expression became extremely ugly because she felt that the situation that Shaoyang was in was completely like boiling a frog in warm water. It was almost a matter of time before he collapsed. At this time, should she turn and leave or draw her sword to help? For a moment, she was very conflicted in her heart. If she went to help, she would not be a match at all. However, if she turned and left or did not help, would it be a little unkind of her? After hesitating for a while, Shen Fian gritted her teeth and the sword in her hand also shone a trace of light. No matter what, she still had to give it a try. After all, she was the one who had caused all of this. If she ran, it would inevitably leave a crack in her heart. At that time, that feeling of guilt would be like a nightmare that couldn't be shaken off. In fact, he might even live under this shadow for the rest of his life. Very quickly, Shen Fian saw Shaoyang shaking his head at her, indicating that she should not interfere. This action made Shinfian a little confused, but very quickly her eyes regained her confidence. Suppress! Xiaoyang roared angrily and slammed his palm down. Immediately, the Sky Qin Mountain appeared above Ji Fei's head and suppressed him with endless power. However, Ji Fei didn't even look at it. Instead, he raised his palm to block it. Suddenly, a huge ice palm appeared out of thin air and actually held the Sky Qin Mountain. The power of the Sky Qin Mountain was not to be underestimated. Although the ice palm held the Sky Qin Mountain, it was still slowly descending. In the next moment, the flying ship appeared from another direction and crashed towards the man at an extremely fast speed. At this point, Xiaoyang was also completely suppressed, so he could not continue fighting like before. Things were out of his control, so he had to think about how to protect himself. How could there be such a perfect ending in this world? It would be a fool's dream to subdue him unscathed and wake him up. Now, Xiaoyang could only give it his all and defeat Ji Fei first. Only by making him lose the ability to continue fighting could they talk about other things. Otherwise, there would be too many unforeseen events. No one could say for sure what would happen next. Boom! Because Ji Fei had to hold the Sky Qin Mountain with one hand, he was immediately knocked back by the flying ship. However, he was only a mile away before he stabilized himself and held the flying ship with one hand. At this moment, Xiaoyang finally had a chance to launch his attack. Streaks of lightning appeared on the silver lightning spear once again. However, the variety of lightning on the spear was different from before. He used the 7 steps of the barbarian god and constantly changed his position so that the black ice arrows could not attack him. However, it was still not easy. The situation changed again. The corners of Shinfian's mouth twitched continuously. It was really hard to understand the battle between these monstrous geniuses. Twists and turns were not enough to describe the changes in the situation. It was hard to imagine when there would be a change in the battle between them that would catch them off guard. Ji Fei growled. He held the flying ship with one hand and threw it out forcefully. Suddenly, wherever the airship passed, countless mountains were smashed into pieces and dust flew everywhere. Then, Ji Fei held the Sky Qin Mountain with both hands. It was obvious that he wanted to throw it out. Thunder dragon roar of 1,000 poisons. Xiaoyang let out a furious roar and shook his long spear. Instantly, a green thunderbolt burst out from his spear. After the thunderbolt surged out, it turned into a divine dragon. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it charged towards the withered man whose legs were protected by the black ice. Immediately, a dangerous aura surged over, and a trace of fear flashed through Ji Fei's eyes. He wanted to dodge, but the Sky Qin Mountain was pressing down on him so that he could not move at all. Therefore, he stood there like a live target. However, Ji Fei did not give up instinctively. With a thought, layers of ice walls began to appear in front of him. They were very sturdy. Under the impact of the thunderbolt dragon, they shattered with a loud bang. They could not resist the powerful momentum at all. The sound of explosions rose and fell one after another. Following a scream, the thunderbolt dragon penetrated the withered man's body and weaved in and out. Chapter 1671. The lightning dragon continued to weave and weave within the withered man's body. The scene was quite spectacular. Every time it surged, ice fragments would continuously fly in all directions. It was just like flying snow as it drifted away. It was an extremely spectacular sight. Xiaoyang was on the verge of collapsing at this moment. Fortunately, with the support of the silver lightning spear, he barely managed to stand. He coughed a few times and spat out a mouthful of blood. Blood splattered all over the transparent, mysterious ice. Not long after, the lightning dragon's power was exhausted and disappeared. The withered man fell to the ground. His body was twitching nonstop, and he looked like a lamp that had run out of oil. It was a ghastly sight, as though he was about to die. As for the heavenly Qin Mountain and the flying ship, it was unknown when they were kept. It was as though they had never appeared. The land finally returned to its previous tranquility. However, the mysterious ice beneath his feet did not melt. It was still extremely cold. Even a thin layer of ice had appeared on the withered man's body. There was even a pale white, icy mist between his brows. Shinfian, who was watching the battle from the side, could not help but swallow her saliva subconsciously. The twists and turns of the situation and the all-out battle made her extremely shocked. Although they were in the same realm, the gap between them was not just a little bit. It could even be said that it was extremely huge. This also made Shinfian's sense of superiority fall to the ground and shatter into pieces. All along, she had been proud that she was from the realm of the gods and looked down on all the geniuses from the outside world. But now, such an idea was indeed very laughable. Although they were in the same realm, the strength that they could display was simply a world of difference. Suddenly, Shinfian also realized that Shenluo's defeat to Xiaoyang was definitely not a coincidence. The gap between their strength was there to begin with. In fact, Xiaoyang might not have even displayed his full strength in the battle back then. The woman smiled. Her smile was very helpless. More than that, it was self-deprecating. She was proud of herself and thought that she was the same. However, looking at it now, it was so laughable. Cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. Sometimes a retreat was not a retreat in the realm, but when others were moving forward with all their might, you were still in the same place. It was equivalent to retreating. At this time, Xiaoyang spat out a mouthful of turbid air and immediately swallowed a medicinal pill. Immediately, the medicinal effect spread out and his complexion regained some color, looking much better. On the other hand, the withered man was not in such a good state. His body was now sealed by profound ice. If no one helped him, he would be frozen to death by the mysterious ice. Afterwards, Xiaoyang put away his weapon and appeared before Ji Fei with a single step. He gently pressed down with his hand and the ice shattered. Xiaoyang stretched out his hand and grabbed the withered man. His body flashed and appeared beside Shinfian in the next moment. Seeing that her companion had captured the tombkeeper, Shinfian frowned slightly. She looked a little confused. Indeed, Shinfian did not understand why Xiaoyang did this. Either you protect me or go into the cave to comprehend, Xiaoyang said indifferently. Hearing the cold words, the sword-wielding woman frowned slightly. She looked a little unhappy, but she did not show her emotions in the end. He has been attacked by the deathly aura for 1,000 years. It's not easy to save him, Shinfian said hesitantly after hesitating for a while. She swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She wanted to say that there was no saving him, but seeing Xiaoyang like this, she did not want to say anything. Moreover, even if this cultivator from Sun's snow boundary was saved, whether he would appreciate it or not was another matter. It was easy to be a good person, but in the end, it might not be a good thing. Xiaoyang smiled indifferently and said, "It's okay. I can't just watch you be corroded by the deathly aura and become a walking corpse." It could be said that this was one of the reasons why Xiaoyang came here after knowing that there was a tombkeeper here. Sometimes it was a great thing to be able to obtain an opportunity, but it was also reasonable to help someone along the way. The sword-wielding woman looked at the entrance of the cave that was almost sealed by the ice, then looked at Xiaoyang and the withered man. She frowned and was very conflicted. Shinfian naturally could not be bothered by the ice. With her current ability, she could naturally break it. However, she wanted to go, but she could not take a step forward. This was because there was a voice in her heart that kept telling her that the path was opened by Xiaoyang, and she did not do anything at all. Was it not right for her to rush in and comprehend the benefits inside first? Moreover, Xiaoyang's injuries were very serious. In addition, he wanted to save someone, so naturally he would have to pay a price. At that time, if something unexpected happened, it would be very difficult for him to defend himself. He might even be consigned to eternal damnation. Looking at Xiaoyang again, it seemed that he did not have so many concerns. One of his hands was directly placed on the withered man's forehead. His eyes were closed, and he was focused on saving the person. It could be said that Xiao Yang's back was completely exposed to the sword-wielding woman. If she wanted to, the sword in her hand could easily cut off his head. Suddenly, Shen Fian's hand that was holding the sword could not help but tighten subconsciously. It seemed that she already had that idea. A gust of chilly wind blew past, bringing with it the chilliness of the ice. It made people shiver subconsciously. That bone-chilling coldness was even more chilling. After all, the ice was different. Even if the person who cast it was unconscious, it still existed. Moreover, in this gloomy world, it would take at least 10 days to half a month for it to melt. The sword-wielding woman suddenly sighed. She stabbed the sword in her hand into the ground and sat down, looking at the thick layer of ice in front of her. She supported her head with her hand and had a thoughtful look on her face. She was thinking about what kind of person the man behind her was. He didn't have any relationship with Sun's snow realm, so why would he help a complete stranger today? The man behind her and the man in the rumors could be said to be worlds apart. There was no similarity between the two at all. It was as if they were two different people. Chapter 16, 72. Xiao Yang naturally couldn't leave his back to the sword-wielding lady, not to mention their encounter in the tomb of the god of sin. However, in the realm of the gods, they had some conflicts because of Shen Luo. However, Xiao Yang was very satisfied with Shen Fian's way of handling things. As long as she didn't stab him in the back, it was enough. Of course, if she had really attacked, she would have turned into a corpse and stayed there forever. It was naturally impossible for him to not have a backup plan. After all, it wasn't his first time roaming the underworld. He understood that it was important to be vigilant against others. Previously, Xiao Yang had planned for the worst, which was that Shen Fian would leave him behind to enjoy the opportunity alone. However, she sat there to protect him and even used her own power to isolate the deathly aura. This was unexpected. However, it seemed that the sword-wielding lady's character wasn't bad. Although she had looked at him with a perverted gaze, she still didn't know what to do. However, he wouldn't be careless in the face of such a major issue, and he wouldn't do anything stupid for his own benefit or for the sake of pleasure. At this moment, Xiao Yang was also clearing the deathly aura in Ji Fei's body at an extremely fast speed. After being attacked for thousands of years, the deathly aura was deeply rooted in the meridians. It wasn't an easy task to remove it. However, after Xiao Yang cultivated the Thunderfire sword technique, his control over lightning was even more extraordinary. Hence, with such help, it wasn't a big problem to disperse and eliminate the deathly aura. Of course, as for the poison in Ji Fei's body, Xiao Yang only needed to use his mind to remove it completely. After all, he knew how to remove his own poison. Although it was a little troublesome to remove the deep-rooted, deathly aura, Xiao Yang was very patient. After all, he couldn't achieve anything great by being anxious. After 20 hours, Xiao Yang finally regained his senses and completely removed the poison from Ji Fei's body. He also fed Ji Fei a pill to keep him alive so that he would never be able to get up again once his last breath was taken. Dispelling the death qi in the meridians was not a difficult task. However, the death qi in the Sea of Consciousness was not an easy task. After all, at that time, not only would he have to eliminate the aura of death, he would even have to face the counterattack of Ji Fei's divine sense, and it was truly a slight headache. Now, Xiao Yang also felt a little tired, so he didn't continue. Instead, he prepared to rest for a while before continuing. "You're done so quickly?" Shen Fian asked curiously. There was a hint of joy in her tone. After the death aura in the man's meridians and flesh disappeared, he began to regain some color. He was no longer as inhuman as before. Everyone had a heart of compassion, but it was either deep or shallow. Seeing that the cultivator of Sun's snow boundary could recover, the inexperienced and not vicious woman was naturally happy. Xiao Yang shook his head helplessly and said, there is still a crucial step to be completed. I need to eliminate the death chi in my sea of consciousness. Hearing this, Shin Fian looked at her tired companion and felt a little heartache. He had not recovered from his injuries, but he was in a hurry to save someone. This kind of mentality was really strange. Do you need pills? Shin Fian asked doubtfully. After all, Xiaoyang came from a place that wasn't rich. Moreover, he must have spent a lot of money wandering in the realm of the gods. She wasn't sure if he had any left. However, she felt that she could still help. After all, her life was saved by him. Xiaoyang waved his hand and rejected Shin Fian's kindness. Although the pills in the realm of the gods weren't bad, he was more assured to use his own. I'm fine now. Thank you for protecting me, Xiaoyang said emotionally. At the same time, the way he looked at this woman had changed greatly. Shin Fian smiled. Some words were stuck in her throat, but she swallowed them back down. It was as if she couldn't say them. After all, there were still some prejudices between the two of them because of their different standpoints. Although they had broken through, it was inevitable that they wouldn't be able to get over it in a short time. Moreover, sometimes actions were more important than words. Even though the chilly wind was blowing, the blood in his heart was still warm. How much chance does he have to return to the great Tao? Shin Fian asked. After all, it was impossible for him to not be affected at all after being corroded by the death chi for 1,000 years. If he was cured, he would only be a cripple. That would be worse than death. I'm not sure either. However, I feel that it's fine even if his soul is destroyed. As long as he doesn't become a dead spirit that is neither human nor ghost, it's enough. Xiaoyang sighed and said. Hearing this, Shin Fian nodded in agreement. After entering the tomb of the gods, she had seen the undead spirits with her own eyes. She knew that they had lost their consciousness and could only be influenced and driven by the death chi, turning into walking corpses. That was pitiful. Xiaoyang didn't dare to guarantee that Ji Fei could recover completely. After all, it was extremely risky to invade someone's sea of consciousness. Most of the time, even if he wanted to save someone, he had to consider his own safety. If he really had no other choice, Xiaoyang wouldn't show any mercy. Due to the medicinal effect of the pill, Ji Fei gradually woke up. Suddenly, the excruciating pain in his body made him scream. Instantly, Xiaoyang and Shin Fian's gazes landed on him with a faint smile on their faces. Although Ji Fei was awake for a short while, his spiritual consciousness soon became dazed because of the death chi. The black flame appeared in his eyes again, and he looked very angry. It was as if he had seen his mortal enemy and wanted to burn them to ashes. However, he couldn't do it because he couldn't move. Seeing that Ji Fei still couldn't recover his consciousness, Xiaoyang directly knocked him out with a karate chop. Shin Fian let out a bitter laugh, helplessly. From the looks of it, it would not be an easy task to save the cultivators of the sun-snow world. Even if they succeeded, they wouldn't be able to recover to their peak state. However, it was better than becoming a part of the tomb of the gods and becoming a walking corpse. Looking at the transparent Xian ice, his mind became more lively and he didn't feel so depressed. The journey to the tomb of the gods was really full of life. Chapter 1673. This cultivator from the sun-snow boundaries life was hanging by a thread. In other words, he was only hanging by a thread between life and death, and it all depended on his thoughts. Of course, this kind of life and death no longer existed. If he didn't do anything about it, his end result wouldn't be as simple as death. Even his past life and present life would cease to exist. Under the great Tao, countless cultivators were like ants, but they had no choice but to move forward. When one encounters a great opportunity, it's inevitable that they would become obsessed with it. Oftentimes, this obsession would cause a huge change to happen to a person, or even cause them to walk down the wrong path, never to return and fall into a bottomless abyss. Although Shin Fian didn't have any friendship with this cultivator before her, they could be considered to be on the same path. Plus, The relationship between the god realm and the sun-snow boundary wasn't bad to begin with. Now that a fellow cultivator had ended up in such a miserable state, she couldn't help but feel pity for him. However, nobody would have thought that the tomb of the god of sin was so dangerous. Although there weren't any clear risks, the dangers inside were more terrifying than the dangers in the open. The death energy could subtly erode a person's mind and change them. In the end, they could only become a walking corpse and completely lose their Tao heart. That was truly terrifying. Even Xiao Yang's expression couldn't help but change. If they fought with real swords and spears, he wouldn't be soft-hearted at all. However, this was a fellow cultivator who had gone astray. How could he turn a blind eye to this? For example, it didn't matter how much they quarreled during normal times. But in a major situation like this, it was necessary to form a united front. With that thought in mind, Xiao Yang swallowed another pill. Although he was not short of time, he still had a lot of time. Although he didn't have much time, it was naturally a good thing to get rid of all the death energy as soon as possible. If this dragged on, things would become more dangerous. Therefore, it was a good thing to get things done as soon as possible. Fortunately, although there were many dead spirits in the tomb of the god of sin, they all had a strong sense of territory. In other words, most of them hovered around a certain place because of their obsession and wouldn't leave easily. That stubbornness was like a prison drawn on the ground. Thus, even after such a long time had passed, they had not been attacked. Xin Fian was also speechless. In her opinion, she had never left the god realm to train. The trip to the godly tomb had also benefited her greatly. She felt that many things were not purely good and bad. If it was in the past being saved by someone she hated, and now they were even working together, she would definitely think that this was a joke, something that was simply impossible. However, facts spoke louder than words. The result was as such, and no one could change it. Moreover, Xin Fian was well aware of her own abilities. If she wanted to explore the tomb of the god of sin alone and search for the opportunity that belonged to her, she was still somewhat lacking. Therefore, it was inevitable that someone would give her a hand and help her. After resting for a while, Xiao Yang calmed his mind and brazenly invaded Ji Fei's Sea of Consciousness. The death qi in the body was easy to dispel, but in the Sea of Consciousness it was different, because what he had to face might not only be the threat of the death qi. Xin Fian, who was at the side, saw Xiao Yang meditating again. She knew in her heart that it was a critical moment and there was no room for carelessness. Therefore, she had to concentrate even more to avoid any mistakes. Of course, as long as there were no accidents, everything would be fine. Fortunately, the tomb of the god of sin was big enough, and at this time there were no disturbances, which was the most worrisome thing. When Xiao Yang entered Ji Fei's Sea of Consciousness, the first thing that entered his eyes was the death qi that seemed to have materialized. It was a black mass, and it was extremely horrifying. It was as if a piece of incomparably white jade had been completely dyed black. Furthermore, it gave off a very strong feeling of disgust. How could an invasion that lasted for 1,000 years be so simple? Moreover, the invasion of the body by the death qi was secondary, and the main thing was the erosion of the soul. The ghastly death qi slowly drifted in the air like a black cloud. It was moving leisurely and crushing everything in its path. After Xiao Yang entered, the death qi was like a beast that had been starved for 1,000 years. After smelling the fragrance of delicious food, it quickly became restless and became active. Suddenly, the inside of the tomb trembled and the mountains shook. In the next moment, the death qi surged crazily and flooded Xiao Yang's Sea of Consciousness, wanting to devour it completely and turn it into its own nourishment. With a cold snort, Xiao Yang's body was covered with thunderbolts. He was fearless, and he directly charged towards the death qi without any fear. Of course, Xiao Yang did not have any fear, because the power of thunderbolts was originally restraining the death qi. However, the purity of the death qi was extraordinary, and it was not as thin as the outside. After 1,000 years of accumulation and compression, It had become extraordinary. Facing the death chi that was like a beast, the thunderbolts continued to bombard it. But for a while it became a lot dimmer, as if it had been completely suppressed and could not move at all. After seeing this scene, Xiaoyang's mind moved slightly. With a low roar, the thunderbolts on his body became stronger. Although doing this would hurt Ji Fei's sea of consciousness, it could not be helped. After all, if there was a wound on the sea of consciousness, it could be slowly healed in the future. However, if the death chi was not removed, the sea of consciousness might completely disappear. In the vast sea of consciousness, Xiaoyang's sea of consciousness was like a thunderball, carrying countless lightning along the way, constantly killing the death chi without the slightest mercy. It was like a meteor crossing the night sky, very gorgeous. Even though the death chi was mellow, under such an attack it was quickly divided, and the intensity of the death chi was constantly weakened. Suddenly, the death chi seemed to be threatened, and it quickly condensed. After a while, it turned into a little person, condensed by the black mist. It stepped on the sea of consciousness, and it was furious. The death chi took shape and condensed into a human figure. The black mist dissipated, and Xiaoyang also saw a piece of black ice with a figure sealed in it. In that place it looked lonely. Chapter 1674. On the hillside, the woman in white looked at the gloomy world and sighed inexplicably. Originally, she thought that there would be great scenery in the divine tomb. She thought that there were too many beautiful things in her heart. However, the reality was too different from what she had expected. Everywhere she looked was desolate and gloomy. It was as if a demon had shrouded her heart. However, when her gaze landed on the hole, her eyes would reveal a trace of passion. Obviously, she was very tempted by that place and wanted to explore it, but she was hesitant. It was as if she saw something she wanted very much, but at this moment, she could only look at it but could not move forward. This feeling was very terrible, but she had no choice but to do so. The two completely different ideas were constantly wrestling in her heart, making her unable to come up with a perfect solution, even though she was at rank 9. She could not help but think that it would be great if her state of mind could be as clear as mysterious ice. However, how could it be so simple? She was a person, not an object, so how could there be so many areas that were illuminated? However, no matter what choice she made, she had to be responsible for it. At the very least, she felt that it was not her intention to sit here, but she could not do anything against her heart and be a villain. Soon after, the woman in white looked back at the man who was using all his strength, and the corners of her mouth unconsciously curled into a smile. Presumably, this was the so-called chivalry. When one saw injustice on the road, one should take action without the slightest hesitation or sloppiness. Gusts of chilly wind blew, bringing with it the chilliness of mysterious ice, which was exceptionally bone-chilling. Suddenly, the woman picked up the sword again and stood up at the same time. Her aura quietly exuded, and her gaze was resolute as she looked forward with a brilliant fighting spirit. Clearly, she had sensed something, which was why she was so vigilant. As a cultivator of the 8th level of Kingwu, her perception was naturally not bad. Very quickly, she was able to detect the movement of the grass in the surroundings and whether there was any danger approaching. Not long after, a man in a black robe flew over. When he saw the ice covering an area of 10 miles and the frozen net on it, he couldn't help but be amazed. He didn't expect that there would be such a spectacular scene in the divine tomb. It was really eye-opening. The black-robed man quickly saw the woman with the sword in her hand, and the corners of his mouth inadvertently revealed a trace of a smile. His gaze quickly passed by the woman, and he saw the two people, one squatting and the other lying on the ground. When the black-robed man saw the person who was squatting, a trace of hatred appeared in his eyes. "Zhang Xianfeng, you better not have any bad ideas," the sword-wielding woman scolded. At this moment, the woman was complaining incessantly in her heart. She actually met such a person at this juncture, which made her feel somewhat helpless. The black-robed man named Zhang Xianfeng was the most outstanding person among the younger generation of the Zhang family in the divine world. He was even ranked 16th on the Hidden Dragon ranking. It was imaginable how strong he was. If it wasn't for the fact that he encountered Shen Luo at the beginning, he would probably have done well in this grand competition. It could only be said that he was a little unlucky. Zhang Xianfeng and Zhang Xuanyi were brothers. Later on, Zhang Xuanyi was beaten so badly by Xiaoyang in the 10 Directions 8 Wasteland map. As the elder brother, how could he turn a blind eye to it? For a moment, Zhang Xuanfeng's heart was filled with excitement. This time, the heavens were really helping him. If it was under normal circumstances, he wouldn't dare to provoke Xiaoyang even if he had 10 guts. After all, Shen Luo wasn't a match for him, and Zhang Xianfeng still had this bit of self-awareness. However, the situation was different now. Xiaoyang's breath was weak, and it was obvious that he was injured. And now he was saving someone, so he couldn't be distracted. In the divine tomb, there were no rules at all. Wasn't this giving him a great opportunity for revenge? How could he miss such a great opportunity? With that thought, Zhang Xuanfeng's eyes flashed with a hint of urgency. Such a great opportunity. He couldn't let it slip away from his hands. This kid beat up your most respected cousin brother to such a state and even humiliated him in every possible way. Could it be that you're going to stand up for him? Zhang Xianfeng spoke indifferently, and there was even a trace of ridicule in his voice. If it was outside, Zhang Xianfeng would still be wary of Xin Fian's identity as a princess. However, in the divine tomb there were no rules at all. Everything depended on strength. It could also be said that in a place where there were no rules, one's heart could be revealed more clearly. In such a situation, one's heart would be exposed without any concealment. Xin Fian didn't turn back to look. She did bear a grudge against Xiaoyang previously, but after going through all these, she felt that she couldn't take a step back now. After all, how could she take a step back in the face of righteousness? If you want the opportunity inside, go and get it yourself. Xin Fian didn't use her identity to pressure Zhang Xianfeng. Instead, she said very calmly, even though Xin Fian was angry, she had no choice but to do so. After all, Xiaoyang's situation was unclear, and she might not be Zhang Xuanfeng's match. Hence, if she started a fight, she might be at a disadvantage. Hence, it was naturally good to take a step back. There were so many opportunities in the tomb of the god of sin. If he did something irrational because of his willfulness, then things might become very bad. What a joke! Xin Fian, you're actually protecting an outsider who humiliated the person you respect. Zhang Xianfeng laughed and said, in Zhang Xuanfeng's opinion, this was a complete joke, a huge joke. This has nothing to do with you. Xin Fian said coldly. Zhang Xianfeng didn't give up and said coldly, indeed, you have nothing to do with me. However, Xiaoyang almost caused my brother's Taoist heart to collapse. He must die. After saying that, Zhang Xuanfeng's voice became colder. If looks could kill, the squatting man would have died many times over. Why do you have to do this? Isn't it better for you to go and comprehend the opportunity in the tomb? Xin Fian said coldly, the greatest temptation in the tomb of the gods was the opportunity. Hence, Xin Fian could only use this to tempt Zhang Xianfeng and make him stop. Chapter 1675. Zhang Xianfeng burst out laughing when he heard that. He thought that her words were too laughable. Perhaps Xin Fian had been in a high position for too long, so she felt that her words carried an extraordinary weight and scared him away? Or was she trying to take advantage of his psychological state? Was that even possible? Zhang Xianfeng had no idea what had happened before this and what the situation was. However, he had analyzed the situation clearly. This was a great opportunity for him to take action and take revenge. If he missed this opportunity, he might not be so lucky in the future. Therefore, he already had an answer in his heart. No matter what Xin Fian said, it would be useless. What if I say no? Zhang Xianfeng teased. The smile at the corner of his mouth became even wider. Xinfian's face instantly darkened. The outcome that she did not want to see the most had happened. She sighed helplessly. Xiaoyang, why did you have so many enemies? Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. In this huge tomb of the gods, you met your enemy at such a critical moment. It won't be too late for me to look for the opportunity after I kill Xiaoyang. Don't you think so? Zhang Xuanfeng's sneer deepened as he spoke. Xinfian placed her sword in front of her chest and snorted. There's no need for us to fall out. However, if you insist on doing this, I don't mind learning from you. Since there was no way to retreat, she could only face him head-on. Therefore, when compromising doesn't work, you can only raise the 3-foot-long sword in your hand to face the enemy. No matter what the end result is, you must have the backbone to fall. Zhang Xianfeng sneered in disdain when he heard that. How strong could a member of the imperial family, who did not put in any effort to cultivate and only enjoyed the good resources, without suffering hardship be? In the second round of the assessment, if Xinluo was not too powerful, would she even be qualified to enter this place? If you insist on doing this, I don't mind letting you suffer. Zhang Xuanfeng's aura surged like a river as he spoke. At this moment, he did not hide his fighting spirit at all. Instead, it exploded instantly. That force was incomparably powerful. Cracks began to appear on the mysterious ice in the air at this moment. This was only the eruption of his aura. It was already so terrifying without any power to counter it. Xinfian snorted. She took a step forward and distanced herself from Xiaoyang. With a wave of her hand, a boundary appeared and protected her within it. Xinfian held her sword. She was not confident. She knew that she was no match for Zhang Xianfeng, but she had to step forward in this situation. Otherwise, Xiaoyang would be in danger. Therefore, she could only hope that Xiaoyang would finish his task quickly. That way he would still be safe. Otherwise, she might die here today. After all, in this place, no matter what happened, it could happen. This was how sinister people were. Moreover, she had some unhappiness with Zhang Xianfeng. Now, it was still hard to say whether he would settle these unpleasantness. Therefore, she was very worried in her heart. Even though he was scared and terrified, and his heart was beating like a drum of retreat, he couldn't leave. Zhang Xianfeng sneered when he saw that. This girl really did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Under such circumstances, could it be that she still wanted to fight with him? That's fine. I'll let you, a golden branch and jade leaf, suffer a little. I'll let you have some fun with all the unhappiness in the past. As for the consequences after leaving the tomb of the god of sin, there was no need to think too much about it. If she could not leave the tomb of the god of sin, then this matter could be treated as if it had never happened. Zhang Xianfeng felt that this was the right thing to do. He felt a sense of satisfaction in his heart. In the next moment, he no longer hesitated and rushed towards the girl with the sword. In an instant, countless auras surged with strong killing intent. It was unparalleled. Even though Xinfian was extremely nervous and even a little scared, there was no trace of fear in her heart at this moment. Instead, she frowned, and the sword in her hand emitted a dazzling sword light. Strands of sword light were like sword qi, spreading out in all directions. Is that all you've got? Zhang Xianfeng shouted angrily and threw a punch at her. Xinfian blocked with her sword. Suddenly, a huge force hit her. She could not resist at all and was sent flying. Although the two of them were in the same realm, the gap between them was huge. Within the same realm, the difference between the strong and the weak was like this. The difference between the strong and the weak was obvious. However, when Xinfian retreated, she immediately waved the sword in her hand. Countless sharp sword energy shot out towards Zhang Xianfeng. She wanted to slow him down so that he could not continue his attack. However, the result was not satisfactory because Zhang Xianfeng seemed to have predicted Xinfian's thoughts. With a flash of his body, he disappeared from where he stood. The sword qi slashed on the profound ice, causing the layer of ice to crack open. Sinn Féin was also shocked. The gap between the two of them was so huge that it seemed impossible to make up for it. Could it be that she was going to die here today? On the other battlefield, it wasn't as peaceful either. Compared to the outside world, the situation there was only stronger, not weaker. Although Xiao Yang's divine soul was extremely powerful, it was not in his sea of consciousness. It was inevitable that he would be restrained. Therefore, he could not display his full strength. On the other hand, the black monster condensed from the death chi was like a fish in water. It could easily display its ability. Now, Xiao Yang's divine soul looked even more miserable. There were countless wounds on his body. Even his body had some scars. Those were caused by the black monster. Under the crazy attack, Xiao Yang's body was very domineering even under the protection of the lightning. However, the black monster was even more ferocious. After a few exchanges, one of Xiao Yang's arms was bitten off by the monster. That was the pain of the divine soul. It was indescribably painful. Of course, the monster was not having a good time. Under the domineering lightning, it was bombarded several times. The death chi on its body was also reduced. Its aura was much weaker than before. Chapter 1676. The black monster crouched on the ground and looked like it was ready to attack. However, it was not difficult to see that its aura had become much weaker. His current ferocious appearance, baring his fangs, was only to intimidate his opponent. That was why he was like a wolf, revealing his ferocious appearance. The monster condensed by the black gas could be completely described as a jackal. The monster strengthened itself by continuously devouring the souls of cultivators. Then it finally took control of them and continued to grow stronger. In the end, it even ate other cultivators. It could be said that it was extraordinarily ferocious. Looking at the monster, the corner of Xiao Yang's mouth revealed a disdainful smile. Of course, it was more hatred. This thing harmed cultivators and could be said to have endless consequences. It devoured people's souls and damaged their minds. After a series of battles, his sea of consciousness, which was almost eroded, became a little shaky, as if it could be destroyed at any time. Therefore, when Xiao Yang made his move, it was inevitable that he would be wary. Of course, he was not completely restrained. Even if he had to pay with his friend's life, he had to get rid of this jackal and wolf. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Xiao Yang took a deep breath and suppressed his agitated heart. Admittedly, his current state was not very good. In fact, it could be said that he was in a terrible state. However, this was how things were, and there was no room for retreat. Even if there was a cliff in front of him, he still had to walk over it at all costs. As for the situation outside, Xiao Yang naturally sensed it. It was also because the flames of war had not spread that he did not take action. How to eliminate the monster in front of him was the most important thing now. Therefore, his top priority now was to help the sun-snow boundary cultivator. As for whether it would succeed or not, it would have to be tried. At the very least, it seemed that the effect was not bad. Although the man's vitality would inevitably be greatly damaged after this incident, it did not matter. As long as he could keep his life, it would be a great blessing. After all, there would still be opportunities to make up for it in the future. But now the pain would be worse than death. That unremarkable piece of profound being had already undergone some changes. Cracks began to appear on it. Although they were very small, they were not completely frozen like before. It was also because the death aura had all condensed together to form that jackal, so now there was no need to worry about being attacked. Therefore, after the profound ice melted, as long as Ji Fei was still conscious, he would know what to do. However, many things were not as simple as taking things for granted. Therefore, Xiao Yang still needed to be on guard. Otherwise, if he were to suffer in silence, it would be useless to tell anyone. The monster raised its head and opened its bloody mouth, roaring like a wolf in a show of force. It was as if he was saying that he was invincible and that as long as he took a bite, he would be able to eat his fill. In the next moment, the monster seemed to know that it could no longer retreat. so it launched another attack. It opened its bloody mouth, revealing its sharp fangs and claws as it charged towards the divine soul that had already become somewhat dim. Those black fangs looked extremely horrifying, causing people to involuntarily shudder. Xiaoyang did not show the slightest fear or retreat. He snorted coldly and clasped his hands together. Immediately, the power of lightning brought about by the lightning fruit appeared again. At the same time, the power of lightning was much purer than before. The monster's speed was extremely fast, and it arrived before Xiaoyang in just a short while. It bit down on Xiaoyang's head, as if it wanted to swallow him whole. The power of the two could be said to be incompatible like fire and water. If they met under normal circumstances, they would naturally retreat. But now it could be said that they met on a narrow path, so they had to make a decision. As for the final result, that was another matter. Therefore, they both wanted to defeat each other. The only difference was that their intentions were different. Naturally, it was impossible for Xiaoyang to resign himself to his fate. With a low roar, he threw out a punch. The lightning energy sizzled as if it possessed an aura that could not be penetrated by 10,000 men. It was extremely valiant. Moreover, it was not reasonable. Boom! The jackal was smashed in the neck and was directly sent flying. It slid on the surface of the sea for a long time before it could stabilize its body. At the same time, after being hit this time, its aura became much weaker. Now it was as if the outcome was already decided. The winner was obvious. The jackal quickly stood up and constantly bared its teeth. However, it could not do anything about the power of lightning and seemed very anxious. Previously, when its aura and strength were relatively strong, it could indeed severely injure Xiaoyang. However, as its power weakened, the gap between the two was naturally revealed. The more it fought, the weaker it became. This was the reality that the monster had to face. In an instant, the entity that the monster condensed quickly dispersed and turned into 9 long snakes that rushed toward Xiaoyang again. The monster knew that it could not continue fighting like this, so it had to change its strategy. Instantly, Xiaoyang's expression changed. He knew that he was already at the point where he had no choice but to resort to desperate measures. The monster knew that it could not win against Ling Xian. It had to give it its all and fight against Ling Xian. Great! Xiaoyang coldly hissed, and the lightning on his body became even stronger. Since you want to trade your life for his, why would Xiaoyang be afraid of you? Moreover, under such circumstances, it was hard to say who would be the one to lose. The 9 long snakes coiled around Xiaoyang's divine soul layer by layer, not giving him any chance to breathe. At the same time, the deathly aura seized the opportunity and crazily began to corrode Xiaoyang's soul. Even though the lightning had destroyed the deathly aura, layer after layer, it continued to consume energy. As long as the annoying lightning were completely exhausted, it could invade Ling Xian's soul. To the monster, Xiaoyang's soul was definitely more delicious than Jifei's. Therefore, this attempt was still worth it. Perhaps this time, he would be able to obtain even greater benefits. That's not for sure. Ling Xian's soul was tightly wrapped, and the long snakes were constantly compressing it as if they wanted to directly strangle Ling Xian's soul and even swallow him. It was extremely arrogant. Break. Chapter 16, 77. The mysterious ice scene on the ground had also undergone a shocking change. The originally beautiful net of ice crystals had been completely destroyed. Even the layer below had countless huge cracks. Many pieces of ice were scattered everywhere. It could be said that it was a complete mess. It was a shocking sight. Compared to that, there was an even more tragic scene. The lady in white who was holding the sword was now in a very sorry state. Her hair was messy and her clothes were tattered. There were even some places where there were strips. Occasionally, one could see some of her naked body. There were many bruises on her body which made one's heart ache. Shenfian floated in the air. She did not take a step back because she knew clearly what would happen if she did. Therefore, no matter what, she could not do that. She could only stand there. No matter what the result was, she had to persevere. Even though her hand that was holding the sword was trembling nonstop as if she could no longer hold it, she did not have any intention of retreating. On the contrary, the intense battle had stirred up her blood. It was only life and death. What was there to be concerned about? Moreover, she should have been dead some time ago. However, Xiaoyang had saved her life. It was only right for her to return this favor to him. A life in exchange for a life. There was no delay. That did not seem too bad. Xin Fian wiped off the blood from the corner of her mouth. She smiled bitterly and gently wiped the blade of her sword. Then she soared into the sky as if she was filled with lofty sentiments. Who said that a lady was inferior to a man? TSK, you're really persistent. If you had this kind of awareness earlier, you wouldn't have been beaten so miserably by me today. Zhang Xianfeng chuckled and said with an amused expression, the difference in strength between the two of them was already huge. The difference in strength between the two of them was even more obvious. After a few exchanges, Xin Fian was also beaten up badly. On the other hand, Zhang Xuanyi only had his robe torn and his flesh was injured by the insignificant sword qi. However, compared to the lady, he was not even worth mentioning. The gap between the two was just that huge. Xin Fian was speechless. What he said was not wrong. When she was cultivating, she did not think that she would reach the 8th rank and could rely on the quota to enter the tomb of the god of sin. In the end, these were just thoughts that harmed her. However, she felt that it was not too late for her to realize this problem now. As long as she could walk out of the tomb of the gods, she would definitely work harder than before. It was all for the sake of not suffering the same fate as today. Speaking of which, my heart really hurts a little. Why don't you give yourself to me, and I'll make you feel less pain? Zhang Xuanfeng's smile changed slightly. That smile made Xin Fian feel disgusted. The reputation of the Zhang family in the divine realm was indeed not bad. To be able to have a foothold in the divine capital was even more impressive. However, compared to the title of being a member of the imperial family, it was not enough. Putting all these aside, Xin Fian was extremely disgusted by Zhang Xuanfeng's current attitude. Some people were said to be unbearable, but they were doing proper things. In such a dangerous environment, they were pure and kind. On the other hand, there were some people who appeared to be sanctimonious in the god realm and had the air of an upright gentleman. Now that they were in this dark place, they revealed their true colors and revealed their incomparably ugly faces. It was truly disgusting. If you don't give in, I can only torture you slowly. When you're out of strength, you'll still be mine. When I'm done playing with you, I'll turn you into ashes. At that time, no one will know about this. Zhang Xuanfeng's smile became wider as he spoke. It was as if he was doing something wonderful. These words made Xin Fian feel extremely disgusted. It was as if looking at him was dirtying her eyes. My father will not let you off. Xin Fian shouted coldly and angrily. This Zhang Xianfeng was really daring. He could only be described as a lunatic. Zhang Xianfeng shook his head helplessly. He looked at her with pity and said, You're really stupid. I said that as long as you don't walk out of the divine tomb, no one will know. As long as the two trash behind you are here, they won't be able to leave this place. No matter what, the only person who could leave this place alive was Zhang Xianfeng. Otherwise, if the news of him humiliating the princess were to spread, not to mention Zhang Xianfeng, the entire Zhang clan would be annihilated. They wouldn't even have a place to stand in the god world. Since things had come to this point, there was no way out. Therefore, it was better to be ruthless. This way, he would be happy and have no worries. No matter how he looked at it, it was a very good idea. Hearing this, Xin Fian's expression changed drastically. You can try. Xin Fian gritted her teeth and said, in fact, she could feel it too. Zhang Xianfeng probably did not intend to let her go from the beginning. The reason why he said that before was probably because he wanted to get rid of Xiaoyang or to determine his condition. As the saying goes, one would rather die in glory than live in dishonor. So what if she died? If she was really ruined by this bastard, it would be the most unacceptable thing. Io, your temper is still the same. It's a pity that this is not Fairy's capital. After Zhang, Xianfeng finished speaking. He let out a low roar and charged forward again. He had already wasted a lot of time. Therefore, he had to end the battle quickly. He had to defeat Xin Fian first. Then he would kill Xiaoyang and the man of unknown origin. Then he would be able to enjoy the spoils of war. Xin Fian was not the kind of person who would wait for death. She shouted and charged forward with endless sword qi. Boom! With just one punch, the sword qi shattered inch by inch. Xin Fian was sent flying again. If she did not have so many protective artifacts, this punch would have been enough to overturn rivers and seas. She might not even be able to stand up again. However, even with that being the case, it was still very uncomfortable. His internal organs had received quite a bit of impact. In fact, some cracks had even appeared in some places. He had received very serious internal injuries. At this moment, the man who was squatting on the mountain suddenly opened his eyes. However, he seemed to have suffered a heavy blow and fell to the ground instantly. Chapter 1678. Xiaoyang fell to the ground and violently coughed twice. His face was extremely pale, as if he had been seriously ill. There was no trace of blood on his face. His aura became extremely weak, as if he had been seriously injured. His chest heaved up and down, as if he was about to stop breathing. In the end, although he used all his strength to kill the 9 death energy monsters, he also paid a great price. His soul was once again contaminated. In the end, in order to protect himself, he could only remove the death energy, which was why he was in such an embarrassing state. It could be said that because of this risky move, it brought him a great deal of harm, but it was fine. Fortunately, he saved the life of the Sun-Snow Boundary Cultivator, so he wouldn't be turned into a walking corpse by the death energy. Therefore, the price he had to pay was worth it. Saving a life was better than building a 7-floor pagoda. Not to mention, he didn't just save a life, he saved a person's life for thousands of generations. The Sun-Snow Boundary Cultivator regained some color due to the death energy in his body being removed, but he still looked sallow and emaciated. His aura was also very weak, like a gossamer. It was as if he couldn't take another breath. This was not a strange thing. Ji Fei had been attacked by the death energy for thousands of years. His spirit force was already exhausted, and he had been supported by the death energy. Although the death qi had been completely expelled, there was no strength left in his body. It could be said that he was extremely weak. Even a child could take his life now. Xiaoyang took a deep breath, and only then did he have the strength to stand up. However, his mind was in a trance, and he felt extremely uncomfortable. Both of his legs were trembling, especially his left arm, which was in extreme pain. This was because his left arm was bitten off by the wolf formed by the death energy, which was why he was in so much pain. Large beads of sweat kept falling from his body. It was very strenuous. It had to be said that the risk of saving this person was too great, and the price he had to pay was not small. At this moment, the Sun-Snow Boundary Cultivator's body trembled as if he had woken up. However, he was so weak that he didn't even have the strength to open his eyes. After seeing this scene, Xiaoyang's mouth revealed a trace of a smile. It seemed that his efforts were not in vain. As long as he was still breathing, it was enough. Immediately after, Xiaoyang took out 2 bottles of pills and quickly fed them to the cultivator from Snow Sun Realm. He took a deep breath and began to calm the qi in his body. Only then did he calm down a little and no longer feel as bad. Boom! With a loud sound, Xin Fian's entire body smashed into a small hill. As for the small mountain top, it directly shattered. From this, it could be seen how powerful and frightening that attack was. Zhang Xianfeng, on the other hand, was suspended in midair with a lofty look on his face. It was as if he was the only one in this world. I'd like to see if you can still get up after this punch, Zhang Xianfeng said as the smile on his face grew wider. The more Shen Fian struggled, the more excited he felt. It was a wonderful feeling. It was as if he was doing something that was very satisfying and could make him feel incomparably happy. At the same time, he was slightly surprised. This golden branch and jade leaf had always been very pampered and had no experience in battle formations. Until now, he didn't expect her to have such a temperament. After being beaten for so long, she could still stand up. However, when he thought about how he was going to smash Xinfian's hopes one punch at a time and make her walk step by step into despair, it was a wonderful feeling. He even almost laughed out loud. He felt very satisfied. This kind of play was really delightful. It was like a cat playing with a mouse. It was very happy. When the mouse was in despair and gave up, the cat would eat it bite by bite. That was the real enjoyment. Before the dust settled, a ray of sword light shot up to the sky. Xinfian stood up again. Xinfian was in a miserable state. Her body was covered with injuries of various sizes. Even the sword light in her hand had dimmed and was on the verge of collapsing. Xinfian, who had never fought before, was now facing Zhang Xianfeng, who had experienced hundreds of battles. The difference between them was like heaven and earth. That lack of battle experience was not something that could be easily made up for. Although they were in the same realm, their battle strength was completely different. It was like a child and an adult having the same strength. Wasn't it obvious who would win? I didn't expect you to be able to stand up. It seems like you haven't suffered enough, Zhang Xianfeng said with a smile. Shen Fian didn't say anything. She couldn't vent her anger now. Now that her cultivation was almost destroyed, it would be very difficult for her to gather it back together. However, even if she was beaten senseless, she would still stand up. He would rather die standing than live on his knees for a moment. This was the pride of the realm of the gods. It was also the pride of the royal family. If I were you, I wouldn't have suffered so much. If you serve me well, I might even let you go, Zhang Xianfeng said with a playful look in his eyes. In Zhang Xuanfeng's eyes, this girl was indeed a very good plaything. When Shen Fian heard this, her face turned pale. However, she tightened her grip on her sword. Xiaoyang naturally heard these dirty words. He sneered and stood up slowly. A ray of lightning flashed in his hand. The silver lightning spear that he had won every battle with in the realm of the gods appeared. The appearance of a saint-level Dharma treasure attracted the attention of the two people in the battle. They looked over and saw the young man who was so weak that he had to rely on the Dharma treasure to not fall. Xin Fian and Zhang Xianfeng were both focused on each other. Xiao Yang's aura was very weak, so they didn't notice it. Therefore, they only noticed it after the Dharma treasure appeared. Right now, Xiaoyang was indeed feeling a little powerless. The feeling of exhaustion hit him like a wave of seawater, causing him to feel dizzy. Now, he could only rely on the silver lightning spear to not fall. However, this scene was very different in Xinfian's eyes. She had finally persevered until Xiaoyang was done. In that case, the following troubles would most likely be easily solved.